Does that mean that 99.5% of the population can be excluded as having donated that sample?
Approximately, yes.
It was pretty new science at that point as opposed to the way it is today. DNA evidence is much more widely accepted and there's a greater expectation associated with it today in a courtroom. Then we had to spend a lot of time dealing with educating people about what DNA evidence was.
You could take an entire series of college courses that would answer that question. So let me see if I can make a simple answer for you. DNA is correctly described as a polymer. That is, it's a long series of components that are all attached together. So we inherit one half of our DNA from our mother, and we inherit the other half of our DNA from our father.
There were many, many long days of DNA evidence. Those were really, really hard days for the jury.
You have written in as to the estimations of...
The DNA evidence took about a month, and you're not going to convince jurors about the science of DNA.
Between approximately 1 and 170 million.
Even those who did go to college are going, ah.
And is that the same result again in terms of these estimates?
Just tell me, just give me a number.
Robin Cotton was one of the outside experts who gave these huge odds, like 1 in billions, that this could be anyone's blood but O.J. Simpson.
Now let's move over to the next dot. Now this gets a little complicated.
The defense strategy was to also make it seem more complicated.
If that dot lights up, you could either have the 1.2 allele.
Yes.
You could have the 1.3 allele.
Yes.
Or you could have the 4 allele.
It really seemed to work in conversations with the jurors afterwards. It really did seem like they didn't fully understand DNA evidence.
If there's one part of this case I remember, it's the reporting of the DNA and being the legal analyst and trying to make DNA sound interesting. I think I was good at it for about maybe a day, day and a half, and then like everyone else, I was somehow blacked out into the ether. And it became clear that people were tuning out. I thought about that poor jury sitting there trying to listen, take notes, trying to figure it out. I remember the first day I had a yellow tablet. I was very, very, very in tune. I was writing down the words. And about the third day, you could begin to see the scribbles going down the side of the page.
Rosemary from New York, do you have a question for Tracy?
Yes. Hi, Chuck. Hi, Tracy. Well, first of all, there isn't a question in my mind but that O.J. is guilty. And so I guess what I'd like to find out a little bit about is what is the educational level that the jury had, both when you were a part of it and perhaps later, I don't know how many of those people remained on. I mean, what was their ability to do critical thinking? And what is your education level, Tracy?
Well, I do have a high school education and some college. And I think most of the jurors, they had some college education from what I know. And then I know everyone had a high school education. I know that much. Yeah, I think we were all just a group of normal people.
What's his name? O.J. O.J.
How could you forget O.J.'s name?
Because I can't stand it. I want to throw up from O.J. This female juror, who I'm less than, you know, I mean, I've been joking about the female jurors, but I got to tell you something. The jury on the O.J. case is really probably off their rockers. And the real problem is they don't understand the law. They don't even understand what the jury is supposed to be doing. They don't understand. This is not a popularity contest. We actually have a bunch of people who are operating probably on a lower level of intelligence than the rest of us. Probably. I don't say all of the jury, but probably most of it.
Who is this rest of us?
The rest of us. The rest of us who have intelligence. These are people who basically don't understand the law. And this Judge Ito is such a nincompoop. Clearly, you know, first of all, there should be a mistrial. There is no doubt. The grounds for the mistrial...
that the prosecution continues to say it. Gil Garcetti got on TV yesterday and said, I still have faith in this jury.
My guess? First of all, Gil Garcetti has totally miscalculated and done the situation wrong, as I said from the beginning. You cannot have an all-black jury. This idea is so offensive that a white jury cannot hand in a verdict, or a mixed jury cannot hand in a verdict on a black man.
And you can't have people continue to keep the peace and walk the streets regardless of the racial makeup of the jury.
When I hear the jury is from South Central and all of this, you got to understand something. A lot of the people who live there don't have a clue what the American justice system is, what a jury is, what the obligation is to serve on a jury, and how it all works. When you see this woman on TV who they just dismissed, and she makes statements like, and I'm not quoting exactly here, but this was the gist. I believe there should have been a lot more blood on the scene. I mean, if a murder like this is going to go on, wouldn't the man or woman or people who did it, wouldn't they be bleeding a lot? So I can't believe O.J. did it. You're like, honey, you're not there to be a detective.
Well, that's what I saw with her statements. There was an awful lot of speculation. Even in her comments about Mark Fuhrman, it was her, you know, I noticed that he was very cold and arrogant, and he seemed not to care. And if you don't care, then you're capable of anything. Yeah. This is her belief. Yeah. There's no evidence to substantiate it.
What you just said is exactly the problem. That's if you're watching Montel Williams and you're in the audience and you want to stand up and make a speech. Yeah. Montel, that man doesn't care about anything he does, and I got to tell you something, Montel. A man who don't care is a man who's capable of anything. When the audience goes, on a jury, it's a different thing. You are presented with evidence. This is not a trial.
And that's what you're supposed to consider.
Not a trial of Mark Fuhrman, whether or not he's capable of anything. And mind you, not basing it on any kind of evidence about Mark Fuhrman, just saying he seems like a kind of guy. This is like the Psychic Friends Network. He seems like the kind of guy who doesn't really care about anything. So anyone who has nothing that they care about, he's capable of anything. Yeah. Let me tell you something. This is a jury. This is why there has to be a mistrial in this thing, and we cannot have a jury from let's say the inner city. Because
why can't we just have a jury? Why does the jury have to be from someplace?
Well, that's just because of the technicality of where the trial is held. They got to move. No, you can't just pick a jury from
far away.
That is not
true. We've been through this before. Yeah. That murder was committed in Brentwood. That jury should be from somewhere in that area.
In Brentwood, yeah, of course. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying the jury should be from where the murder was committed. Yes. The reason it was changed, remember I told you this early on in the trial that I knew that the jury had, the point of the trial had been changed? It was because the prosecution felt, hey, we got to get a black jury or else the verdict will have no credibility.
No, they didn't change the point of the trial. That is a Los Angeles County situation. Yeah. The point was they can pick the jury from anywhere, and the district attorney's office decided that they would pick the jury pool from that black area, that predominantly black area.
You can't do that because, in all seriousness, a lot of the people from that area don't even know what the hell the jury... They don't even understand what you're supposed to be doing on a jury. They think this is the Montel Williams show. They think it's Oprah. Oprah, I'm telling you, O.J. looks upset. And this detective over here looks like he don't care. O.J. cares, the detective doesn't, and a man who don't care is a man capable of doing anything. Therefore, he planted the glove properly. I mean, they ought to just get Montel or Ricky Lake to run the trial. It's all nonsense. And this jury, I am telling you that what has happened in this country, I don't know if it's the influx of third world. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is.
Don't blame immigrants.
Well, I got to blame somebody. I don't know what's going on in South Central or wherever these jurors are from that we had to get these black jurors, but there is an identification with the criminals. There is a lack of understanding of what the criminal justice system, what a jury's job is. And the jurors are loving it, and these are jurors who clearly do not understand listen, they do not understand. I'm talking about a matter of intelligence now. They do not understand the American judicial system. They don't understand that they're supposed to sit there and try to be impartial and evaluate the evidence.
Once it's handed to them, not before.
Just listen to the evidence sit and go, and they also have to have a feeling that if some murder has been committed, that criminal should go to jail. They can't come in with an agenda that I am downtrodden. Oh, my God, what if I get arrested one day? Everyone's going to get me because I'm black.
But remember,
and they're going to, and the cops are going to plant evidence on me. If this is some juror, and there are a lot of underprivileged people who don't understand the jury system. They don't. They just don't get it. It's not something they comprehend. Whether it's an IQ problem or I don't know what it is, but they do not comprehend what a jury is supposed to do. A jury is supposed to go in there, listen to the evidence.
Emotions should be left at the door.
Yeah. And even if you have them, be smart enough when you get dismissed from the jury to sort of like know how to play the game. I mean, she's not even covering up. Some guy comes up to me. See, this is what people say in the privacy of their home. You want to hear what they're saying?
Uh-oh.
You want to hear what they're saying? It's racist.
I know it is.
And I didn't say it. A lawyer. You want to hear it? But I don't want it attributed to me.
I want to think of all people as nice and wonderful.
And I told the guy not to talk like this. Honestly, I did.
Sure you did.
No, I did. Then I'm not going to tell you what he said. No, wrong.
What did he say?
A lawyer says to me, those crazy Schwarzes do not know how to sit on a jury. They're sitting with a whole different agenda. It's got to be this is what the guy said, and I did stop him, and I said, please do not use words like that.
In?
What? I'm not going to say who said it. I protect my sources.
You haven't been away from home. You've been sick.
No, I spoke to somebody on the phone about it. And
this is him in his kitchen.
All right, so you got me. All right, I'd like to apologize. In Spanish now. No, I did not say this. What is it?
Your dad's on the phone.
Oh, yeah. I got to go talk to my dad.
What's this about?
I don't know. Hey, Dad. Dad?
Yeah.
Hey.
I had to call in because I'm getting nauseous from this trial.
I know. I thought you weren't watching it either.
I'd never watch it.
You don't?
I tell you one thing that gets me. Most of the jurors that went on there had their mind made up before they even heard the evidence.
Of course.
And
they could have voted before they sat down.
Right.
Let me tell you something that's unfortunate about the jury system. There really should be an IQ test given. I mean,
He's right.
Being funny.
He is so right.
For a trial that is this intricate and involved, I mean, you really have to be smart to understand what's going on.
Right.
And first they should give everyone an IQ test, which is, I mean, it's not the meaning about that.
Right.
And then from that pool, pick out the people.
I guarantee you that woman they released, I mean, I would like to administer, I will actually pay her to come on this show and be administered an IQ test.
Kind of an aptitude test?
Because it is clear to me that she does not understand what the role of a juror is.
She's worried about how the guy walks around. And,
right.
And this one's too forceful. And listen.
Yeah, and the other one cries too much, and Denise Brown cries.
The prosecution is spinning its wheels.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, it's very sad that this kind of a person, she should be ashamed of herself. As you were saying all morning, she has no understanding of what the jury system is about.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Thursday, February 11th, 2021. So I have been told. Black History Month. We are reading, this is our 12th study session on Jeffrey Toobin's The Run of His Life, The People versus O.J. Simpson. We are picking up in the middle of Chapter 19, which is titled Stockholm Syndrome. We heard last week about Jeanette Harris and her being one of the dismissed jurors, black female, and how Toobin scolded her for her conduct and, things that she revealed during her interview and what have you. And we heard some of that during the introduction. I will be brief because we had such a layered audio segment to start off the broadcast for this week. The first segment was from Court TV, the 12th episode out of 25, where they are talking about the DNA evidence. And we heard Shireen Maghami, suspected racist. This is the white woman. She was saying that the DNA evidence, it was complicated, and she spoke to some of the jurors afterwards, and it seemed that they did not fully understand DNA evidence. The gall The audacity. I want to say, and her last name is spelled Maghame. I wanted to ask her, Miss Shireen Maghame, do you totally understand DNA evidence? Judge Lance Ito volunteered, hey, when I was in college, I never went near the chemistry building, biology building. I don't know anything about that. Anyway, the second audio segment, they had, this was Charles Grodin, white male, suspected racist. He was interviewing Tracy Hampton. Now, this is a different black female. This is not Jeanette Harris, who is one of the dismissed jurors. Tracy Hampton just said it was too much. Her family wanted her to leave. She just said, she was having difficulty, so she asked to, be excused. She did an interview about her experience. That's online. You can check that out. But one of the callers dialed in, said, she prefaced her question by saying, no doubt in my mind OJ's guilty. I just want to know what the education level is of the jurors and yourself. And then we heard a nice healthy segment, or I won't say healthy, but we heard a substantial segment from Howard Stern that is from April 7, 1995, so right in the middle of the trial and pretty much in line with where we left off last week in the book. And you heard over and over, black people are ignorant, IQ problems inside. He used a lot of the coded language. I'll retract. A lot of the coded language, urban areas, and I don't know if it's immigrants, but he was pretty direct. Sometimes the Schwartzes are crazy and all the rest, just on and on and on. We need IQ tests. And I thought Jeffrey Toobin said that there's some sort of hesitancy about pointing out the intellectual deficiencies of Negroes because you might be thought of as racist. I just heard a whole litany of people spanning 25 years calling out these Negroes are dumb. And again, it was not an all black jury. Again, I don't know. Do we have honorary black people? I've never heard of such a thing. There were 2 white people and a non-white, non-black male amongst the final jurors. So did they become honorary black people as a result of their participation in the O.J. Simpson trial? Inquiring minds want to know. My last comment, and we will proceed. Chapter 19, Jeffrey Toobin, the run of his life. Does Mark Fuhrman totally understand DNA evidence? Let me say it correctly. Mark G.E.D. Fuhrman, Mark high school dropout Fuhrman, Mark not 1, not 2, but 3 community colleges Fuhrman. What's his IQ test? Audio segment 1.
Ito did make one change as a result of his interviews with the jurors. Responding to the complaints of Cryer and a black 25-year-old flight attendant, Tracy Hampton, the judge transferred 3 of the deputies who had been guarding the jurors at the hotel. The jurors noticed their absence on the night of Thursday, April 20th, and several of them were outraged. They had formed attachments to some of the deputies and felt that the deputies had been treated unfairly. 13 jurors decided to write a letter of protest to Ito, and to back it up with an even more conspicuous display. The following morning, Friday, April 21st, began with one of the more curious public spectacles in the history of American jurisprudence. Every morning, the jurors would be taken from their bus to a lounge on the 11th floor of the courthouse. A few minutes before testimony began, they would go down a freight elevator to the 9th floor, where they would walk single file past the reporters and spectators assembled for the day. On this Friday, the 13 protesting jurors all wore black outfits to court, as in an ersatz funeral procession. The rest of the jurors, the remnants of the Jeanette Harris clique, including Lon Cryer, Tracy Hampton, and Sheila Woods, defiantly wore bright colors in counter-protest. To a certain extent, the protests crossed racial boundaries. All of the white and Hispanic jurors, plus 7 African Americans, wore black. But all of the counter-protesters were African Americans, including both of the remaining black men. But even this signal was muddled because the two black men on the jury, Craven and Cryer, couldn't abide one another. The protest provided a vivid demonstration of the Stockholm Syndrome, which holds that captives come to identify with their keepers. The one thing that stirred the jurors from their usual passivity was a perceived attack on the deputies who protected them. In short, the jury was in chaos, leaving the trial on the verge of collapse. Ito canceled testimony for the day, explained to the jurors that the deputies had been transferred, not fired, and generally gave everyone a weekend to cool off. It worked for a while, and the following week the judge eased tensions on the jury somewhat when he finally dismissed Tracy Hampton. She had looked almost catatonic through the entire trial, rarely directing her glance away from her feet during testimony, and she had asked several times to be excused from the case. On May 1st, without objection from either side, Ito agreed. A few months later, Hampton recovered sufficiently to pose for a Playboy pictorial. It was clear, as the DNA testimony droned on in the courtroom, which juror most troubled Cochran and the defense team. Francine Florio Bunton, a 38-year-old white telephone company employee, who was following the prosecution's case with keen interest. She was probably the most educated and worldly juror, the only one who complained about not being allowed to browse in bookstores. Jeanette Harris, the defense's biggest known partisan, despised Florio Bunton. During the jury protest in April, Florio Bunton wore a defiant expression and a long, flowing black gown. On May 25th, Ito called the lawyers to chambers to say that he had received a letter in the mail the previous day. He read it out loud to them. "Dear Judge Ito," it began, "I have been debating over and over what to do with this information. But after seeing you last night on the news telling the pain your family went through during the war and what my family in Germany endured, it touched my heart. And I felt so grateful to live in a country with very strong civil rights and a strong constitution. I guess that's why I feel so ashamed for the information I have. I work for a literary agent. I'm only a receptionist. It is true I am very young, but I am aware of what is happening with this office, and one of your jurors on the Simpson trial. It has been kept very secret, but I know for a fact that my boss has entered an agreement with a juror and her husband. The working title for the book proposal is Standing Alone, a Verdict for Nicole. It is obvious to me that the woman and her husband came to the conclusion of Mr. Simpson's guilt and sold the book with that agreement. I have not come to you sooner because I, too, feel Mr. Simpson is guilty. But after seeing you last evening on television and seeing how what happened to your family and mine made you open your heart to the public, it affected me greatly. I am in a moral dilemma that a 20-year-old receptionist should not be in. I can only identify the juror as female, once an alternate, husband became ill, about 40 years old, a white woman. She did not want to be on the jury, but her husband is the one driving this. She is very apprehensive and is worried this will become public. The husband wants her to stay on, but she wants off. My boss has met with the husband at the Intercontinental Hotel, which I assume is where the jury is staying. I know you are a very fair and decent man and judge, so I know and have faith that you will use this information in a way that you know best. The letter, which was postmarked Los Angeles, was signed anonymous. There was no mystery to anyone about the subject of the letter. Florio Bunton was 38 years old, and in late April she had asked to be removed from the jury because her husband was suffering from pneumonia. At that time, Ito talked her into remaining on the case. Still, attempting to be thorough, Ito decided to undertake the by now familiar ritual of bringing the jurors into chambers one by one and asking them about the letter. Were they writing books? Had they spoken to a literary agent? All of the jurors, including Florio Bunton, said no. Just in passing, in the course of these interviews in his chambers on May 25th, Ito told each juror not to discuss the subject of his questions with the jurors who had yet to be interviewed. But Yolanda Crawford, a 25-year-old black woman, told Ito that she thought 2 jurors had violated that instruction. She said that when Farron Chavaria, a 29-year-old Hispanic woman, returned to the jury room from Ito's office, she wrote on a newspaper and called Florio Bunton over to read the note. Just looked like they were trying, to be secretive about it, Crawford said. Ito sent his clerk into the jury room to collect all the newspapers, and sure enough, she found a copy of the Wall Street Journal on which was scribbled, "They asked me about a juror writing a book." Ito brought Chavaria back into his chambers. At first, she denied writing a note, but when the judge confronted her with it, she broke down in tears and confessed that she had written it to Florio Bunton. Jury service had obviously been a rough ordeal for Chavaria. Her skin had become blotchy and irritated, apparently because of the stress, and she had complained to Ito that Willie Craven had stared at her and intimidated her several times. She read one self-help book after another, The Dance of Intimacy, then The Dance of Anger, and any number of others. Chavaria told Ito that she wrote the note to Florio Bunton to remind her about an incident where another juror's girlfriend had made a remark about writing a book. Ito then called Florio Bunton into his chambers. "Did another juror before you came in here write you a note about our discussions in here?" "No," said Florio Bunton. The judge then showed her the note. "Was that note shown to you, scribbled out by another juror?" "No." "You're sure?" "I'm positive." "Any reason why 2 other jurors would say that note was shown to you?" Ito asked. "I have no idea," Florio Bunton replied. Everyone in the judge's chambers, Ito, the defense lawyers, even Marcia Clark, thought Florio Bunton was lying about seeing the note. Ito brought Florio Bunton back another time and confronted her with the anonymous letter about the book. Florio Bunton was indignant. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I am here for one purpose, to be a juror." Plainly disgusted at the entire line of questioning, Florio Bunton finally said, Jesus, I want out. Just let me go. This is absolutely ridiculous." With Marcia Clark's consent, Ito did just that, dismissing Florio Bunton for lying about the note from Chavaria, not specifically for the underlying accusations in the anonymous letter. Only 4 alternates remained. The origin of the anonymous letter to Ito about Florio Bunton remained and remains a considerable mystery. The author had a good deal of accurate inside knowledge, including Florio Bunton's approximate age, her husband's medical condition, and the name of the juror's hotel. Yet Florio Bunton and her husband continued to deny that they had ever discussed a book project with anyone, and she ultimately did not write a book. A survey of all Los Angeles-based book agents by 60 Minutes in March 1996 found no one who matched the self-description offered in the letter, which further corroborates Florio Bunton's claim that no such conversations took place. Members of the defense team, who had a motive to want Florio Bunton removed, have categorically denied any role in the letter, and no evidence has surfaced tying them to it. In the end, it was probably either a freelance effort by an insider to help Simpson's cause, or part of a personal vendetta against Florio Bunton. In keeping with the obsessive media interest in the case, Florio Bunton became a paid consultant to NBC's Today Show in the late stages of the trial, analyzing developments in the trial from her unique status as a former juror. As it turned out, the judge's anonymous correspondent did O.J. Simpson a great favor, for Florio Bunton said later that she definitely would have voted to convict him. Both in the courtroom and in what passed for their private lives, several jurors showed signs of depression. One juror, Tracy Kennedy, tried to kill himself after he was dismissed, and another, Tracy Hampton, was rushed to the hospital with an apparent anxiety attack on the day after she left the jury. The jurors were further shaken when they learned that on July 19th, one of the deputies who guarded them in the courtroom, Antranik Guvajin, was murdered while trying to stop a burglary at a neighbor's house. The isolation from friends and family, the endless waits as Ito listened to the lawyers haggle, and the mind-numbing testimony about arcane scientific matters all gave the jurors more than adequate reason to be miserable. Watching one after another of their colleagues summoned to Ito's chambers and then dismissed, without being allowed so much as a goodbye to their fellow jurors, or an explanation for the dismissal from the judge, added to the strain. Denied access to alcohol by the sheriffs, several jurors took solace in food. Family members struggling to find some common ground with their increasingly estranged loved ones began bringing gargantuan feasts to the hotel during visits, mostly cookies, cakes, and desserts of every description. The remaining jurors gained weight at a fantastic pace, which only compounded their despair. Though Ito did not dismiss Ferrin Shavaria immediately after he caught her passing the note to Florio Button, her days on the jury were numbered. On June 5th, Ito decided to let her go because she had violated his order in tipping off her friend about the judge's inquiry. Ito's other action on that day came as more of a surprise. He dismissed Willie Craven because the court has received numerous reports of personal conflict between him and other jurors, including Craven's deliberate and offensive physical contact and the threat of physical contact. Yet Ito provided a less than overwhelming list of Craven's misdeeds, principally a couple of purported shoves in the elevator and a pair of complaints from jurors that Craven had stared at them. In short, it appears that the judge, too, was monitoring the racial makeup of the jury. Upon reflection, Ito may have recognized that he had dismissed Florio Button too precipitously, but having done so, he realized he had to dismiss Shavaria for essentially the same offense. That meant he was dropping consecutively 2 non-African Americans. It is difficult not to conclude that Ito then pulled Craven, a black man, as a sop to the prosecution. Lawyers on both sides saw it this way. The trial had become so swept up in race that, regrettably, the judge seemed also to be party to the bean counting. The unexpected dismissal of Craven sent Marcia Clark literally skipping with joy out of the courtroom. The 14 survivors, 12 jurors, and now just 2 alternates, did not get much of a reward. After Shavaria and Craven were ousted, they heard from Dr. Lakshmanan Satyavagasvaran, the Los Angeles County coroner. He had not actually examined the 2 victims, but the pathologist who did, Irwin Golden, had made so many errors and testified so poorly at the preliminary hearing that the prosecution decided to call his boss instead. Dr. Lakshmanan, as he was addressed, couldn't do much more than guess how the murders had occurred, but he did so in dramatic fashion. Lakshmanan said that he believed a single killer with a single knife could have inflicted all the wounds on both victims. In his scenario, Nicole was first knocked out by a blow to the back of the head. The killer then leaned over her unconscious body, pulled her hair back, and slit her throat. Prosecutor Brian Kellberg had Lakshmanan demonstrate the movement by standing behind Kellberg and using a ruler to simulate a knife. Jurors and spectators alike recoiled at the grisly spectacle. This method of execution had drawn prosecutors' attention at an early stage in their investigation. Those with military experience recognized that the killing bore great similarity to the way U.S. Navy SEALs are trained to dispatch their adversaries. In the weeks before the murders, Simpson had been filming an NBC pilot, Frogman, where several ex-SEALs had served as technical advisors. Had O.J. been trained to kill this way? The prosecutors made a half-hearted effort to make the connection, but the technical advisors weren't very cooperative, and the issue faded amid the press of other business. There were, in fact, relatively few coroner-related issues in dispute in the trial. Yet Kellberg kept Lakshmanan on the witness stand through 8 excruciating days of direct testimony. A former medical student who switched to law, Kellberg had a sophisticated understanding of pathology, but he hadn't tried many cases in recent years. The examination amounted to a display of self-indulgence, with the jurors forced to stare at horrible autopsy photographs for days on end. Nicole's neck wound propped open, as big as a baseball, her eyes open in hazy comprehension. Goldman's savaged torso, pockmarked by knife wounds. Kellberg's extravaganza also cost the prosecution the high ground on the issue of the length of the trial. Previously, most of the delays had come from long and meandering cross-examinations. Now defense lawyers could, and did, blame this prosecution excess. The truth was, Kellberg's fellow prosecutors did not know when he was going to finish this marathon. So when he did, they were caught by surprise. Late on the afternoon of Tuesday, June 13th, Richard Rubin received a frantic call in New York saying he had to be on a plane to Los Angeles the following morning. Rubin didn't even know precisely why he was being called to testify. He was, after all, only an expert on gloves. Chapter 20. Too Tight. In a trial that showcased a good deal of shoddy detective work, the investigators also scored some brilliant successes. One of them involved the famous pair of brown leather gloves. The left hand recovered from the murder scene, the right from the narrow pathway behind Cato Kalin's room at Simpson's Rockingham estate. The detectives set out to learn where and when, and if possible by whom, the gloves had been purchased. And they started with only one clue: the gloves themselves. Each glove bore a tag with the trade name Heiress, the size extra large, and the style number 70263. A phone call to the Heiress isotoner company revealed that the prosecution had caught a break. Even though Heiress was the biggest glove company in the world, selling about 4 million pairs a year, this particular style number constituted only a tiny part of its inventory. Even better, as far as the prosecutors were concerned, this style was sold only at one chain of stores in the United States, Bloomingdale's. When Phil Van Adder tracked down Richard Rubin, who had been the general manager of the Heiress isotoner glove business in the early 1990s, Rubin told him, "You have no idea how rare those gloves are." So the investigators took it a step further. They asked Nicole Brown Simpson's parents if they could locate her old credit card bills. The Browns turned them over, and Van Adder and Lang carefully looked through them to see if there might be a charge for a glove purchase at Bloomingdale's. To their astonishment and delight, there was, right around Christmas 1990. The detectives then enlisted the assistance of the FBI, which sent agents to Bloomingdale's in New York to locate the actual sales receipt. They were lucky again. According to a receipt on December 18, 1990, Nicole Brown Simpson bought 2 pairs of Heiress Lights leather gloves at the Bloomingdale's flagship store in New York. Researching further, the detectives found that while Bloomingdale's had received about 12,000 pairs of Heiress Lights in 1990, only 300 were brown and size extra large, and just 200 of those had been sold. Besides the DNA evidence, this sales receipt may have been the most incriminating evidence in the entire case. Who else in Los Angeles except O.J. Simpson would have had access to these extremely rare gloves? Who also, except O.J. Simpson, would have used them to murder his ex-wife? Even if one accepted the defense theory that Fuhrman had planted one glove at Rockingham, the record of Nicole's purchase of the gloves amounted to devastating evidence of her ex-husband's guilt in her murder. It is therefore all the more astonishing that the day prosecutors presented this evidence to the jury turned out to be the single best day of the trial for their adversaries. The conclusion of Lakshamanan's horrific and interminable testimony left the participants in the case with an almost giddy sense of exhaustion. Even the defense team welcomed the glove evidence as a respite from Lakshamanan's catalog of severed arteries and transected jugulars. When the doctor finished his testimony just before lunch on Thursday, June 15th, the defense lawyers spent much of the break examining and goofing around with the gloves. Just about every lawyer tried them on. When Richard Rubin, the prosecution's glove expert, came to court and subjected the gloves to an almost comically meticulous examination, defense investigator Pat McKenna quipped, "Who is this guy? The Dr. Lee of Bloomingdale's?" The lunchtime hijinks did have one important ramification. Shapiro and Cochran noticed that the gloves, even though size extra large, were not very big, and Simpson's hands were. In the L.A. County Jail, the defense lawyers had spent months greeting Simpson with the customary jailhouse handshake, palm-to-palm contact against bulletproof glass. They had seen his hands every day. The gloves, they suddenly realized, might not fit. The subject of the gloves' fit was also on the prosecutors' minds that afternoon. Bill Hodgman was in his office preparing material for the cross-examination of Simpson, if he decided to take the stand. Sometime earlier, the prosecutors had examined the gloves and found just how tight they were. Phil Van Adder, who has a big, meaty fist, had put the gloves on and had noticed the snugness. This was intentional on the part of the maker, for the Eris Light was a very unusual model. Made from extremely thin leather, more like a woman's style, it was meant to feel very light for a cashmere-lined men's glove. It was designed to fit closely, almost like a racing glove. At lunch, Clark and Hodgman discussed whether they should put the evidence gloves on Simpson's hands. They decided it wasn't worth the risk. These gloves were several years old, had been through extensive DNA testing, and had several small samples of the leather cut out. The two lawyers figured that all the wear and tear might have made them shrink. Worse, Simpson would have to wear latex gloves underneath the evidence gloves, which would almost certainly alter the fit. Especially when the latex gloves were taken into account, there were simply too many variables to risk a demonstration. Mostly, though, they feared that Simpson himself would control the experiment. Clark passed the word to Darden just after lunch. "Don't do it." Darden nodded agreement. Even though he'd had the 8-day duration of Lakshamanan's testimony to prepare his next witness, Darden had never spoken to Richard Rubin before the former glove company executive arrived in Los Angeles the day before his testimony. When they did speak, Darden never asked Rubin a single question about the size of the gloves, their fit, or their condition. In other words, Darden called Rubin to the stand, virtually cold. Earlier that day, Darden had called Brenda Vemich, who had been the Bloomingdale's glove buyer, to testify about the receipt from Nicole's purchase of the gloves in 1990. Cochran couldn't do much with Vemich on cross-examination, so Darden was feeling pretty confident when Rubin followed her to the stand. Rubin's direct testimony was actually very brief, no more than 10 minutes, and had nothing to do with the size of the gloves. He testified solely to explain that Eris had delivered only about 300 pairs of brown extra-large Eris lights to Bloomingdale's in 1990. After a rather aimless cross-examination by Cochran, Rubin was about to be excused. Just then, though, a paralegal arrived in the courtroom with a pair of gloves. A new pair, from the prosecution headquarters on the 18th floor. When Darden looked like he was going to use them for a demonstration as part of Rubin's redirect testimony, Cochran asked to approach the bench. There Darden whispered to Ito, "I would like to lay the foundation to show they are the exact same size, similar make, and model so that perhaps we can have Mr. Simpson try them on at some point to determine whether or not the gloves found at the scene and at his home will fit him." Cochran objected, and Ito had an understandable reaction. "I think it would be more appropriate for him to try the other gloves on. I mean, the real gloves that were found." Clark had a ready and appropriate response, the same one she had discussed with Hodgman and Darden earlier. The only problem is, she told Ito, he has to wear latex gloves underneath, because they're a biohazard, and they're going to alter the fit. Ito decided to excuse the jury for a moment to let Rubin examine the new gloves and determine if they were the same model as those in evidence. As the jury was filing out, F. Lee Bailey sidled over to Darden. Almost as much as Cochran, Bailey knew how to push Darden's buttons. "You have the balls of a stud field mouse," Bailey whispered to Darden. "If you don't have O.J. try them on, I will." With that, Bailey had baited the hook. When the jury was out, Rubin said that the new pair was not the same model as the evidence gloves, so Ito disallowed their use. Darden, of course, had discussed none of this with Rubin in advance. Flustered, Darden told Ito, "Before the jury returns, that is, outside the presence of the jury, we would like to have Mr. Simpson try on the original evidence items." But Ito was momentarily distracted by another subject, and he invited the jury back in before Darden could conduct the demonstration with the evidence gloves. Embarrassed by his own lack of preparation and goaded by Bailey, Darden barreled ahead, now in front of the jury. "Your Honor," Darden said, "at this time the people would ask that Mr. Simpson step forward and try on the glove recovered at Bundy as well as the glove recovered at Rockingham." Seated beside Darden, Marcia Clark widened her eyes in astonishment. They had discussed this very subject. Darden had said he was not going to do this. Barely a minute before, Darden had said he was only going to do it outside the presence of the jury. Clark thought about saying something, risking the humiliation of her colleague by saying, "No, stop." But she kept her seat. Ito's clerk passed a box of latex gloves to the defense table. For several agonizing minutes, Simpson struggled to get the thin rubber over his hands, and plainly failed to get the latex gloves on all the way. Light shined through the gloves between each of Simpson's fingers. Thus, even before Darden handed the evidence gloves to the defendant, it was clear that they could not fit over the latex. Darden walked over to Simpson and said, "I'm handing Mr. Simpson the left glove, Rockingham." This, too, was wrong. The left glove came from Bundy, the right from Rockingham. Darden asked Simpson to walk toward him and the jury, and both Cochran and one of the sheriff's deputies came with the defendant, creating a traffic jam in front of the jury box. As Simpson walked, he began trying to put on the left glove. At all times, Simpson kept his thumb bent outward at a right angle to his wrist. That, too, made it impossible for the gloves to fit properly. O.J. grimaced and said more or less to Cochran, but really to the jury, "Too tight." "Your Honor," Darden said, his voice now trembling, "apparently Mr. Simpson seems to be having a problem putting the glove on his hand." Johnny Cochran, stifling a smile, properly objected to Darden's narration of the event. Simpson struggled with the right-hand glove, and then began pounding between his fingers, as if he were actually trying to make the gloves fit. But the bunched latex limited how far the gloves could go, and Simpson never pushed between his thumb and forefinger, where the angle was really preventing the gloves from going all the way onto his hands. Darden noticed Simpson's cocked thumb and said, "Can we ask him to straighten his fingers and extend them into the glove as one normally might put a glove on?" Ito said yes. But Cochran burst in again. "Your Honor, object to this statement by counsel." Still, because the demonstration was completely under Simpson's control, the defendant simply ignored the request to straighten his fingers. Recognizing the catastrophe he had wrought, Darden tried to salvage something. "Could we ask him to grasp an object in his hand, a marker, perhaps, Your Honor?" Simpson took a marker and held it in his fist the way a baby would, with his thumb still splayed out. Panicking even more, Darden asked Simpson to stimulate a stabbing motion, but Cochran scotched that idea with an indignant objection. Ito sent Simpson back to his seat. O.J. slipped the gloves off in a flash, which would not have been possible if they were really too tight. Floundering, Darden asked to approach the bench. As he did, Alan Dershowitz, who was making a rare appearance in the courtroom, had to cover his mouth to keep from laughing out loud at the fiasco. Darden secured permission for Rubin to place his hand against Simpson's to determine if the gloves should have fit. Ito approved, and Rubin placed his palm against the defendant's. Back at the podium, Darden asked Rubin, "Should the gloves shown to you here in court today have fit Mr. Simpson's hand, in your opinion?" "At one point in time," Rubin replied, "those gloves would be actually, I think, large on Mr. Simpson's hand." Prodded by Clark, Darden asked, "Could you tell whether or not he was intentionally holding his thumb in a certain position so that he couldn't put the gloves on?" It was an argumentative and speculative question, and Ito prohibited it. Then the judge called it a day. Back on the 18th floor, Darden, shell-shocked by the experience, sank into his office chair. Hodgman sought him out and said, "Come on, Chris, we're trial lawyers. There's a way out of this." In the book he wrote later, Darden gave a self-pitying account of the aftermath of the demonstration. "I passed my colleagues in the hallway and they were silent. But others on the team remembered that several people approached him to offer support. It was certainly true that Hodgman invited Rubin into Darden's office, and within minutes of the end of the court day, they were all planning how to undo the mess. It was also true, however, that Clark did not speak to Darden. As she was driving home from the courthouse that day, she called her friend, Lynn Reed Barragona, on her car phone. "Do you think this is it?" Clark asked, not really wanting an answer. "Do you think it's over now?" The glove demonstration provided the classic example of Darden's shortcomings as a trial lawyer. His impetuousness, his immaturity, his failure to prepare either himself or his witnesses adequately. Though some jurors thought Simpson was mugging and making a conscious effort to ensure that the gloves would not fit, several others viewed it as the turning point in the case. For good reason, then, the prosecutors sought to control the damage to their case. Darden asked Rubin to stay in Los Angeles over the weekend, and on Monday asked him a series of tortured questions in court, attempting to undo the harm from the demonstration. Could the gloves have shrunk? Yes. Something that would have been more obvious to a jury in a cold-weather region. Could the latex glove have affected the fit? Of course. Rubin had brought to court an unworn pair of the precise make and model of the evidence gloves, and those, placed on Simpson's hand without a latex barrier, clearly did fit. The damage control operation succeeded mostly in underlining that the prosecutors themselves regarded the previous week's stunt as a disaster. Cochran's smirking re-cross-examination of Rubin focused mainly on how distraught the prosecution was after the previous week's testimony. Once again, the prosecution's distress overshadowed some highly incriminating evidence that came next. William Bodziak was the anti-Fung, the unassailable government forensic expert. He had devoted more than 20 years to the study of foot and shoe impressions, and he conducted a remarkably detailed analysis of the prints leading away from the murder scene to the side of Nicole Brown Simpson's house. Bodziak said the shoe prints had been made by a size 12 Bruno Magli shoe, known both as the Lion and the Lorenzo, a model that retailed for about $160. Based on the lengths of the strides and the size of the shoes, Bodziak said the individual who made the impressions was probably a little more than 6 feet tall. Simpson stood 6 foot 2 inches, and like only 9% of the population, wore a size 12 shoe. What was more, Bodziak found a slight impression of this Bruno Magli type of shoe on the rug of Simpson's Bronco, the presumed getaway vehicle. And perhaps most important of all, Bodziak's analysis of the crime scene photographs showed only one set of shoe prints at the scene, the most compelling evidence that there had been just one killer. Finally, in the grisly, if speculative conclusion of his testimony, Bodziak said that impressions on Nicole's back and on her dress were also consistent with the size 12 Bruno Magli's. In other words, completing the picture from Lakshamanan's testimony, Bodziak suggested that Simpson had planted his foot on the unconscious Nicole's back, grabbed her hair with his left hand, and cut her throat with his right. An image of startling savagery. Bodziak testified on Monday, June 19th, and F. Lee Bailey had spent the previous weekend conducting, with characteristic gusto, a week-late celebration of his 62nd birthday. In a bizarre and rambling cross-examination, Bailey actually suggested that 2 murderers might have conspired to wear the same shoes to throw off the police. Would it be possible for 2 people to arrange, knowing that footwear, particularly if you're in the business of crime, can be almost as dangerous as a fingerprint? Would it be possible for 2 people to arrange to arrive at a crime scene in the same footwear, make, and model? An incredulous Bodziak told him, "I don't believe, in my opinion, that could possibly happen." Pursuing this novel theory, Bailey first called Bodziak by the wrong name, and then asked, "Do you think these fellows chat together at all once they get in the hoosgow?" "I'm sure they do." "And most of them are acutely aware of the mistakes they've made?" "Yes." Bailey went on, "Professional assassins frequently do not get caught. True?" Hank Goldberg objected to this odd query, and Bailey staggered to another subject. During the break, Cochran followed Bailey into the lockup with Simpson and told his colleague to pull himself together. "Stay on point," Cochran scolded. "You're trying to show how smart you are, and all you're doing is showing how smart he is." Later that day, Simpson himself was angry at Bailey's rambling about the hoosgow and other irrelevancies. Simpson never made up his mind about Bailey. He admired his roguish aggressiveness, but feared his personal instability. "That's it," O.J. said after court on this June day. "I don't want to see him in court again. The man will do no more witnesses." After her nearly 3 months without examining a witness, Marcia Clark returned to the trial, nearly incoherent with indignation at the defense's racial appeals, but at a loss for an effective response. When Dershowitz made a formal motion charging the prosecution with targeting certain black jurors for removal, a rather frivolous claim, to be sure, Clark replied with a bona fide courtroom rant. "Of all the motions made by the defense, I find this one the most offensive, groundless, and baseless," she said, by way of introduction. "This was a motion filed deliberately for inflammatory effect. It has no law in its support. It has no facts in its support. This is a scurrilous attempt to inflame the community, if not the very jury itself. It may be constitutionally protected speech, Your Honor, but constitutionally protected does not mean moral, does not mean ethical, and does not mean truthful. And the groundless, baseless, inflammatory allegations contained in this motion are the lowest tactics I have seen yet in this case." Ito rejected the defense motion, but it wasn't hard to catch the edge of desperation in Clark. These tirades contributed to the impression that Clark had a larger role in the trial than she actually did. Her denunciations of the defense team made good television, and they often served as the trial's nightly soundbite, even when Clark was not examining any witnesses. The prosecution never really rallied after the glove incident. Shortly after Bodziak completed his testimony, Peter Neufeld showed that a prosecution DNA expert witness, named Bruce Weir, had made errors in calculating some of the odds of the genetic matches in the case. The changes themselves did not amount to much, but they further damaged the air of incontrovertibility with which the prosecution had attempted to surround the DNA evidence. Clark had just one more important witness to present to the jury, Douglas Diedrich, an FBI hair and fiber expert, and that experience, too, began with a prosecution botch. Though Clark had had nearly 3 months to prepare Diedrich's testimony, she did not turn over to the defense all the photographs Diedrich would be relying on until the night before he took the stand. Not surprisingly, and with some justification, the defense complained to Ito about being sandbagged by this late disclosure. When Ito gave the defense lawyers an extra night to examine the photographs and interview Diedrich, they found something else that the prosecution appeared to have withheld: an extensive written report on the evidence by Diedrich. Clark said she had never seen the report. Again, as Simpson's lawyers were only too willing to point out, the prosecutors had committed the kind of lapse in discovery for which they had so often denounced the defense. "This is more than a mistake," Cochran said. "This was calculated. This egregious violation comes as our jury waits, as the prosecution case whimpers to a conclusion." As a sanction against the prosecution, the defense asked the judge to exclude Diedrich's entire testimony, or at least a good part of it, and Clark nearly wept with frustration as she pleaded with Ito to let her proceed. To preclude evidence that is important to the proof of the elements of the crime would unfairly punish not just the victims, but the people of the state of California. And I do point out to the court the families of Ronald Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson, Clark told the judge. If the court feels that we have been remiss, then I would urge the court to penalize us personally, or myself personally, but please don't penalize the proof of the case. This speech by Clark, in particular the way she played the victim card, represented a considerable gamble. Many judges would have taken offense at Clark's attempt to make Ito feel guilty about hurting the prosecution's case. A crueler jurist than Lance Ito would have invited Marcia Clark to explain to the victims' families herself why her own mistakes, not the judges', had jeopardized the case against O.J. Simpson. But Ito, placid to a fault, let Clark go without the reprimand she deserved. He also steered a middle ground in his ruling, one consistent with his truth school inclinations. He allowed Diedrich to give the bulk of his testimony, but precluded him from discussing some of the matters that had been mentioned in his belatedly discovered report. And so, once again, devastating evidence against Simpson came after a disheartening preamble for the prosecution. Still, Diedrich did present a stunning catalog of the evidence tying Simpson to the murders. Among his findings, hair in the blue knit watch cap found near Goldman's feet matched Simpson's hair. Hair found on Ron Goldman's shirt matched Simpson's hair, which was likely deposited by direct contact, possibly when Simpson grabbed Goldman by the throat from behind. Hair matching Nicole's was found on the bloody right-hand glove at Rockingham, consistent with Lakshamanan's and Bodziak's testimony that Simpson had yanked her by the hair before he slit her throat. Blue-black cotton fibers, the color of Simpson's outfit when he went to McDonald's with Kalin, were found on the Rockingham glove, the socks in Simpson's bedroom, and Goldman's shirt. Fibers from Goldman's shirt matched those found on each of the gloves. Carpet fibers, like those from Simpson's Bronco, matched those found on the knit hat and on the Rockingham glove. It was on this last category that Clark paid the price for her discovery dereliction. In fact, Diedrich had written in his report that these rare synthetic fibers could have come only from a 1993 or 1994 Ford Bronco. Simpson's was a 1994 model. But under Ito's ruling on what Diedrich could testify about, the jurors could hear only that the fibers were consistent, not that they were so unusual. Bailey, who had worked his way back into Simpson's good graces, made the point on cross-examination that hair and fiber matches do not yield results as conclusive as fingerprints or DNA tests. Still, analyzed objectively, the hair and fiber matches should have been close to conclusive evidence of Simpson's guilt, or at the very least, a clear indication that Fuhrman did not plant evidence. How, for example, could Fuhrman have arranged for fibers from the Bronco to be on the Rockingham glove, or Bronco fibers to be in the hat found at the crime scene? How could he have put Simpson's hair on Goldman's shirt? In a perverse way, it almost hurt the prosecution that it had so much incriminating evidence against Simpson. In many murder cases, even a single hair or fiber match is unusual. Here, the sheer number of associations between Simpson and the evidence made the evidence seem too complex, when in fact it merely showed just how guilty Simpson was. In the end, the hair and fiber evidence seemed to have virtually no impact on the exhausted jurors. It was not even mentioned during jury deliberations. It did not help that Clark's rustiness showed during her examination of Diedrich. Rattled by Bailey's frequent objections, she provided a halting and convoluted presentation of this highly significant evidence. Diedrich completed his testimony on July 5th, almost 1 year to the day after the end of the preliminary hearing before Judge Kennedy Powell. Scott Gordon, the prosecution's domestic violence expert, never tired of arguing that the team should flesh out the story of Simpson's abuse of Nicole with a few more witnesses. With just 2 alternates remaining on the fragile jury, and no witness waiting in the wings to testify about physical altercations between O.J. and Nicole, Clark, Hodgman, and Darden decided that new witnesses weren't worth the consumption of time. The prosecutors had long since decided to forego presenting any evidence relating to Simpson's flight in Cowling's Bronco on June 17, 1994. True, the low-speed chase amounted to evidence of flight, and the money and disguise in the car suggested a premeditated plan for escape. But Cowlings had said the cash was his own, and the detectives precipitately returned the money to him after the surrender on June 17th. As for the disguise, Simpson had witnesses who would say that it was so he could take his children to an amusement park in peace. Even if Simpson's explanation sounded far-fetched, the prosecutors weren't positive that Simpson had really been trying to escape. All in all, as Hodgman said, the chase evidence was a can of worms. It would require calling a number of witnesses, including Simpson's secretary Kathy Randa, and of course his friend Al Cowlings, who were sure to shade their testimony in Simpson's favor. These witnesses would tell the jury a great deal about Simpson's grief over the death of his ex-wife. Worse, the full story of the chase might require several more weeks of testimony. After a nearly 6-month-long prosecution case, the prosecutors didn't have the will for more, and it is difficult to blame them. If the jury wasn't persuaded by the domestic violence and the DNA, Hodgman said later, I don't think there was anything in the chase that would change their minds. And so on July 6, 1995, after 92 days of testimony, 58 witnesses, 488 exhibits, and 34,500 pages of transcript, Marcia Clark told Judge Ito and the jury, "The people rest."
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade, the Black O.J. Simpson, the glove demonstration. I'm excited to get to what folks wrote in, people who dialed in, but we will give one quick extra audio segment. This is kind of two separate clips. So the first portion, it's about 4 minutes from the ESPN documentary 2016, Made in America. It's about 8 hours. It's pretty lengthy. This is from the 4th episode, and they're talking about the gloves. You'll hear a lot of the folks you know, Mark Fuhrman, Marcia Clark, Bill Hodgman, Carl Douglas, Jeffrey Toobin, lots of the folks that you should be familiar with. The second section, it starts right after they come with the lie that O.J. Simpson was not taking his arthritis medication while he was in jail, and that somehow contributed to the gloves not fitting. That's where the ESPN segment will stop, and then we'll hear a segment from Brian Heiss, white man suspected racist. He's done a lot of research on the O.J. Simpson case, and he has a video about the gloves and specifically about all of the excuses, in my view, lies over the years, 25 years now, of lies about these gloves. And he gets to the arthritis medication specifically because that was mentioned in the trial. That's why I say for some of this, there's no reason that, you know, anyone should be lying, and these lies shouldn't be effective because the trial is on YouTube. So anything that was discussed, refuted in the trial, there's no way people should be, you know, going out and spewing things that are flagrantly contested, discredited, I should say, discredited in the trial. So we'll hear a quick segment. This is the gloves not fitting, starting off with ESPN's Made in America 2016, Context of White Supremacy. Listen out for Jeffrey Toobin.
What was found on the glove at Rockingham?
Simpson's blood, Nicole's blood, and Ron's blood. That glove is now tied into 3 people that can only intersect when they're bleeding. That might be a time frame, might be a little difficult to put together unless you are killing 2 people and cutting yourself.
Whoever wore that glove killed those people.
Yes.
I'd like to show you a pair of gloves. Showing you People's 164A.
That is an Eris leather light glove that was an exclusive glove for Bloomingdale's.
And what is the size?
Size is extra large.
Is that a Bloomingdale's credit card sales receipt?
Yes.
And is there a signature on the credit card receipt?
Yes.
Can you read that signature to us?
Nicole Brown.
It was later in the afternoon, and the person who they had given the testimony regarding the glove.
All right, Matt, try this on you.
You could see where it was leading up to.
It's supposed to be an extra large glove?
Yes.
The extra large is kind of small?
No, but they stretch.
Obviously, it was too big. At 24 years old, I could see this is a trick. Don't fall for it. We could see that that glove is big on his hand. You don't have to do anything.
That afternoon, I got a call from Marcia, basically affirming the game plan. We're not trying the glove on, right?
There's too much of a gamble here. It's shrunk. He's probably been working out his hand. Absolutely not.
I went over to him and said, Chris, you know you're a good shot, but you've got the balls of a stud field mouse. That glove won't fit, OJ, and if you don't show the jury that be the fact, I will.
Chris says, I want to do it. And I told him in no uncertain terms why we should not be doing this. And he said, well, if we don't, they will. And I said, then let them. Let them. And we can show why it was a bullshit experiment. It was never going to work between the shrinkage and the latex. It's never going to fit in the same way. Don't do this. Don't do this. It was the biggest fight Chris and I ever had.
Darden, I think, felt, you know, I've been pushed around in this courtroom enough. I've been made to feel small. You could see the disaster coming.
There's a camera to our right, watching everything. Johnny comes back from sidebar and says, okay, guys, they're going to ask OJ to try on the gloves. I don't want anyone to react.
We've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Mr. Darden, do you have any further questions, Mr. Rubin?
Just a few, Your Honor. Your Honor, at this time, the people would ask that Mr. Simpson step forward and try on the glove recovered at Bundy as well as the glove recovered at Rockingham.
All right, you can do that seated there.
You could hear a pin drop. OJ was initially seated, putting on the first glove.
I'm handing Mr. Simpson that glove from Rockingham.
And right when it was clear it did not fit, OJ goes into naked gun mode. he stands up and shows his hand. And that's when he's now okay.
Having a problem placing the glove on his hand.
The guy's an actor, for God's sakes. He's playing to 50 million people.
Mr. Simpson. All right, records reflect that Mr. Simpson has both gloves.
What was he going to do? Make a good faith effort with plastic over his hands?
All right, would you show that to the jury, Mr. Simpson, in a minute?
The whole thing was so wildly inconceived, so totally inappropriate, so doomed to failure. The idea that Chris Darden would do this.
Mr. Darden, would you wrap it up, please?
I looked at him like, I can't believe you did it. You let him play you. You are the weaker one. And you didn't have to be.
You just take the gloves, you take both attorneys and a deputy and the suspect, and you go into chambers. And you do it on the record in chambers. You don't do it with latex underneath. My grandson couldn't have gotten into those gloves with latex underneath.
In which Mr. Simpson put the gloves on today?
Yes, I did.
Okay. You've seen people put gloves on in the past.
Yes, I have.
Did he put the gloves on in a manner consistent with what you've seen other people?
Sustained. The jury observed what happened.
It made the prosecution look silly.
Anything unusual about the way Mr. Simpson put the gloves on based on your experience?
Sustained.
I felt sorry for him. Because he looked weak.
I have nothing further. I have nothing further. All right.
This was the definition of the trial lawyer's mistake. Don't ask a question to which you don't know the answer. He didn't know whether that glove fit.
Chris honestly felt that he would have a dramatic courtroom moment by demonstrating the gloves fit. It was an intuitive move on his part, and it was a mistake.
Had OJ never put that glove on, I would have assumed that it fit. I saw how big it was. And that's when I just knew that, why is this guy here? He's ruining this case.
Outside of Perry Mason, what could be more dramatic than O.J. Simpson showing the jury that the killer's gloves don't fit? Prosecutorial attempts at damage control might not be able to undermine the power of that image.
The funny thing about the glove, he didn't want to put them on. He said, look, if you're worried about the gloves fitting or not fitting, just don't take your arthritis medicine. No big deal.
The murder gloves do fit O.J. Simpson, according to Chris Darden. He has accused Simpson of rigging the glove demonstration. At a heated sidebar conversation, Darden said Simpson's arthritis medication, quote, is anti-inflammatory, and we're told that he's not taken the stuff for a day. It caused swelling in the joints and inflammation in his hands.
OJ had rheumatoid arthritis, and he took anti-inflammatory medicine prescribed to help him with that arthritis. I was told by Robert Kardashian that OJ stopped taking his arthritis medicine about a month and a half before that issue would come up at trial.
There's also a theory that came out that he was on arthritis medicine, but then went off it during the trial, which could have produced swelling in his hands. Could that have impacted how the glove fit?
I've heard so many theories about those gloves, swelling, salt.
Everything.
Salt, in the diet, and the jail diet, high in sodium. And I've heard so many excuses and reasons for it.
He said, look, if you're worried about the gloves fitting or not fitting, just don't take your arthritis medicine. No big deal. And he said, Mike, my hands would hurt like hell. And I said, why would they hurt like hell? And you can just see the light click. Just hands would get swollen, couldn't bend his knuckles. So he didn't take arthritis medicine for like 2 weeks.
Do you think that made a difference?
Well, he couldn't bend his hands. You tell me.
So one thing I did learn, for example, Chris Darden, Marcia Clark were never supposed to ask O.J. to try on the glove. He'd probably been working out his hand, developing muscles in his hand, and we knew that the glove would shrink, right? It'd been in the elements, it's leather. What we didn't know until I saw it on this film was that O.J. Simpson was taking arthritic medication for his hands. And he was told, if you stop taking this arthritic medication, your hands will swell, your joints will stiffen. My God.
In the courtroom, Mr. Cochran.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you very much.
You said you needed to talk to the court about something?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
Your Honor, yesterday and I guess a couple of days ago, there was a statement made by Mr. Darden at sidebar regarding Mr. Simpson not taking some medication. And that statement was false. And since that time, we've had occasion to had Sean Chapman of my office talk to Dr. Johnson, the L.A. County Jail. And Mr. Simpson has, on every occasion, taken his medication. And the medical records at the jail verify that fact. And I want to, there was a story written about this that's totally nonsensical, medically contraindicated, and I thought compelled as an officer of the court to indicate what the records indicate, what my client has also indicated, that he takes his medicine every day, and that he has never at any time not taken his medicine for his rheumatoid arthritis, sulfasalazine, I think it's called, and that the records at the jail so indicate that, and I think that the record should be made clear in that regard. And we took the further statement, as I said, to talk to Dr. Johnson this morning, who verifies that fact also. So I felt compelled to indicate that to the court.
Context of White Supremacy. Gusty Renegade, the black O.J. Simpson. I thought it's so important to point that out because as we've been spending months now reading about the O.J. Simpson murder case, where he's accused of murder, I keep saying, hey, if O.J. Simpson committed these crimes, which I thought he did before we started reading these books, if he committed these crimes, there should be no reason at all to lie. You just present the facts. They've said for a quarter century, mountain of evidence, overwhelming evidence. Isn't that what they've said? If that's the case, you don't need a teaspoon of lies on top of your mountain of evidence. Just present the facts, and we would see Mr. Simpson's guilt. Now, if it was just, a one-tooth white person, or maybe just like 5 white people, or even non-white people saying O.J. Simpson didn't take his arthritis medication, and that's, why the glove didn't fit. If that were the case, it would be one thing. That was Gil Garcetti, the former prosecutor. His son is now mayor of Los Angeles, in charge of making decisions about the Rona and school openings and things. You also heard O.J. Simpson's former manager at the time. This is like widely promoted. Christopher Darden was saying this in court. That was what prompted Johnny Cochran to say something about the arthritis medication theory in court. In addition, I said Christopher Darden, it was reported in 2012 saying that, maybe Johnny Cochran tampered with the lining. All of these lame excuses. He was splaying his fingers out like a 2-year-old. And all of this other nonsense. At minimum, it would just be, it was a bad idea. Perhaps we shouldn't have done it. He's still guilty. Moving forward, maybe they shrunk or whatever other lame excuses that they want to craft and come up with. Incidentally, there's lots that I could add with this one because obviously everybody who writes about the O.J. Case writes about the glove element. I'll fast forward to Johnny Cochran's, but on the way, Jeffrey Toobin lies so much. That was Jeffrey Toobin. He was the one who said it was so ill-conceived and so doomed to failure. And of course it's going to fail if you're in charge of the glove. What is he going to do? Make a good faith? That was all Jeffrey Toobin right there who was speaking. You heard Mark Fuhrman at the very beginning, Tom Lang, all the people you know, F. Bailey, all dispersed throughout there. The ESPN series is absolute trash and propaganda, much like Jeffrey Toobin's book. Now, he mentioned this week Francine Florio Bunton, one of the jurors who was dismissed, white woman, and he says, oh yeah, I would have voted OJ guilty. Absolutely. That's what he said, right? Now, I'm reading from the Washington Post. Again, not some radical archive. This is 1995, June. I'm skipping down. Florio Bunton has been at the center of allegations of racial turmoil on the panel. She was one of the 13 jurors and alternates who wore black in April to protest Ito's dismissal of 3 sheriff's deputies who had been accused by Harris of favoring white jurors they were guarding. And she herself was accused by Harris of expressing racial animosity by kicking Harris and knocking another black juror on the head. Allegations Florio Bunton strongly denied. Florio Bunton's statements about the case are a particular blow for the prosecution. She says its case is still too circumstantial despite the introduction of the DNA evidence. The bloody sock and the glove found at the Simpson estate are compelling, she says, but she would need more. A footprint at the scene that was irrefutably Simpson's, for example. She doesn't buy the defense's theory that police conspired to frame Simpson for the murders of his ex-wife and a male friend, but she does have doubts about the blood drops. She says the drops were very small and many were degraded and they could have been dropped there before the murders. She says those of Simpson's at the murder scene could have been from a previous time to the murders. She's cautious that it's not over yet. We have thinking people here. Imagine that. She says of the jurors, they're picking up the nuances of the witnesses. The defense is doing a pretty good job. They're putting doubts in people's minds. They're putting doubt in my mind. Oh, wait a minute. I'll give you a little bit more. She says, nonetheless, she says she is convinced that at least one of the black jurors remaining on the panel would not convict Simpson no matter what the evidence, and she reserves her deepest anger for the judge who dismissed her from the panel. Judge Ito, I want to ring his bell, she said. I want to bop him over the head. The man is wild. He's leading the trial down the road to a mistrial. My own personal opinion is I think Judge Ito is afraid of a Rodney King type incident. He wants to clear the jury of any taint of racism. He assumed I was racist. The man is wild. All right, Johnny Cochran, Journey to Justice, writing about the glove. This is on page 299. On June 15, 1995, the prosecution called to the stand a man named Richard Rubin, who had been an executive with the firm that had manufactured the gloves recovered at Bundy Drive in Rockingham. The DAs were essentially jumping through hoops trying to show that the gloves belonged to O.J. Simpson. Obviously, the first step would be to ask O.J. to try them on, and Darden appeared to be flirting with the idea. Both Shapiro and I had already tried on the gloves with the requisite latex liners to prevent contamination, and then put our hands up against Simpson's. Obviously, the pair of gloves they had didn't fit O.J. Simpson. He himself had repeatedly told me he was perfectly willing to try on the gloves since they weren't his. Knowing that, we didn't want the prosecutors to talk around the point. We wanted them to ask O.J. to put the gloves on because it would have more impact if we staged such a demonstration as a part of our cross-examination of Rubin. I made a few controversial feints at Darden over the issue to put him on edge. It was one of those days when he clearly seemed rattled, but I knew the one person he couldn't stand taking anything from was Lee Bailey. Lee and I huddled. One more push, and that young man might just go over the edge, I suggested. During a recess in the testimony, Lee walked casually over to Darden and said, "You've got the balls of a stud field mouse." "What are you on my back for now?" Chris replied with one of his patented snarls. I'll pause on the snarl. This is what I mean for, like, if we're going to talk about little jabs and slights, insults in the courtroom. This Studfield mouse, I'm inclined to believe that F. Lee Bailey said it. We interviewed him. He said it. It's in a whole lot of people's books and different sources, so I'm inclined to think that maybe this happened. When Jeffrey Toobin accused Johnny Cochran of calling Christopher Darden a nigger, it's not in any other book, newspaper article, nothing except the FX series. Toobin is a consultant for that, and they relied on his book. So when you can quote your own lie, works great. Now you can create a new source. Sometimes you do that as a master deceiver. You help create multiple sources. What did I just say? Jeffrey Toobin was a consultant, and his book is based on, or the series, the FX series is based on his book, and he's also in the ESPN documentary. So you kind of help create two sources. Continuing, snarl. "If you had any nuts at all," Bailey sneered, "you'd make OJ try on that glove. If you don't have any, try on the glove. If you don't have him try on the glove, we will." And so he did. At Chris Darden's demand, OJ stood in front of the jury and futilely attempted to pull the obviously undersized gloves onto his decidedly oversized hands. "They don't fit." Simpson turned to Darden and said, "They don't fit. See, they're too tight." The jury, all eyes and ears at that point, took the whole thing in. It was one of the worst humiliations I have ever seen a prosecutor suffer in front of a jury. Darden had allowed himself to be bullied into making the mistake every first-year law student is warned not to make. Never ask a question to which you do not know the answer, or conduct an experiment of which you don't know the results. As we drove to the office that afternoon, I thought to myself, we just may have won this case. It was, I told my jubilant colleagues back at the office that night, perhaps the most expensive piece of remedial legal education I'd ever seen. They all laughed and then laughed again when someone quipped that, all things considered, Darden has helped the defense more than Shapiro. Oh, I forgot I wanted to give a little bit extra. Let me make sure I get in. Let's see. It was also clear to me that Christopher Darden had developed something more than a collegial attitude toward his co-counsel, Marcia Clark. Marcia enjoys kidding, pointed kidding. So do I. She has a flirtatious manner. I let her indulge it. She had a particular antipathy toward Shapiro, whom she called the empty suit. She would slide up beside me, put her hand on my shoulder, and whisper into my ear, "You guys are having too good a week, Cochran. Give us a break, huh? Let the empty suit do a witness or two." "Marcia," I would exclaim in hushed tones during the weeks of scientific testimony in which she took no part, "are you still on this case? I thought Brian Kellberg, their forensic specialist, was now in charge. Is Gil going to let you do anything else?" All this passed in the form of whispered exchanges, and it clearly drove Darden to distraction. "Stay away from my woman," he growled at one point, only half in jest. Marcia, I could see, was simply wearing down under the strain of an unsettled personal life. Darden's temper was wearing thinner. We began looking for ways to exploit that, and one soon presented itself. That is the full setup, and that leads into the gloves. The only reason I include that is because Christopher Darden has a similar passage talking about him defending Marcia Clark from the reckless eyeballing of F. Lee Bailey. So again, when you see things kind of substantiated in different texts, I have a stronger inclination. I'll give a tad more and then we'll get to the callers. This is chapter 13, and David took a stone, biblical title. On July 6, 1995, O.J. Simpson's prosecutors, visibly weary and dispirited, wrapped up their case. The legal term for such a moment is rest, but most observers felt slumped to a halt better described the district attorney's posture. We had always been slightly puzzled over why all the commentators who insisted on calling us the Dream Team never seemed to notice the thundering herd on the other side of the courtroom. In terms of human and financial resources, we were ludicrously outmatched. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office had never deployed as many prosecutors on a single case as they did prosecuting O.J. Simpson. At any given this is the same county as the Marilyn Manson murders. That is crazy. Anyway, at any given moment, more than 40 deputy district attorneys and more than a dozen clerks were working full-time against us. They also could draw on the resources not only of their own investigative staff, but also the LAPD and the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. That's who's doing the guarding of the jurors. They had the technical services of the FBI's crime laboratory, the world's finest, as well as the services of the California Department of Justice, Interpol, and the private facilities of Cellmark. By the time the trial was through, the prosecutors would have spent an estimated $8 million, a sum O.J. Simpson never could have matched. The prosecution's overwhelming material advantages allowed them to screen, prepare, and call 58 witnesses during their case in chief, and to put before the jury 488 individual different evidentiary exhibits. They had taken nearly 6 months to put their evidence before the jury. I will stop there. 6 months. I even submit the defense probably could have won this case without putting on a single piece of evidence. When the prosecution rests, that's where we stopped at, right? I think the defense could have said, nothing. We rest. Defense rests. O.J. Simpson is waiving his right to testify. We're good. We're going to make sure that we can do it right for the summertime. Save us 3 months because this didn't wrap until October. We will be right for summertime. You all have nothing. We can rest right now. Now, I'm just thinking ahead for the defense case. Obviously, that means no Fuhrman tapes. The jury didn't get to hear most of that anyway. Obviously, that means Fuhrman, no perjury. The jury didn't get to hear that anyway. That means no witnesses to come and testify about Fuhrman's racism. And that means no Dr. Lee. Many of the jurors said that Dr. Henry Lee gave brilliant testimony in really picking apart some of the so-called evidence and blood, DNA evidence and what have you. But that would mean no Dr. Henry Lee too. So that's some major things, would be missed. But I mean, I think they could have not called a single witness and we would have got the exact same result. The number is 720-716-7300. The code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The number again, 720-716-7300. The code 564-943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. First few folks who dialed in, if you have thoughts, observations to share, lines should be open. Feel free to proceed. Let's see. Let's see, while folks are getting their thoughts together, I'll make sure to get some of the emails that people have shared with us as well. Let's see. Email is untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. If you have thoughts, questions to share. Let's see. First email, one of our investors wrote in. All right, so this is chapter 19, Stockholm Syndrome. It was probably a freelance effort by an insider to help Simpson's cause or part of a personal vendetta against Florio Bunton. Toobin seems to be very determined to characterize this suspected racist favorably. I thought so too. He spent a lot of time talking about how she was so intelligent. We rarely hear that being associated with the jury. She was so intelligent, well-traveled. Next. And again, he said, Florio Bunton, I was going to convict O.J. The report that I read from the Washington Post, she had doubt. She did not think the prosecution had proven their case. Maybe she changed her mind. Number 2, he writes, L.A. County coroner had not actually examined the two victims, or when Goldwyn had made so many errors. The errors made by the prosecution's side in this case are staggering. Say it twice. Did O.J.'s race play a role in how lax people were on the prosecution side, or were they just plain incompetent, or both? Incidentally, with Erwin Goldwyn, he is the coroner who actually performed the autopsy on Ronald Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson. He did make a lot of errors, and Dr. Lucky, that is the nickname given to Dr. Lakshmanan, non-white male doctor who testified at the trial, did not perform the autopsy but testified at the trial. Robert Shapiro asked some great questions on the stand in cross-examination and saying, is that your policy in the LA County District Attorney's Office where you call a physician to testify at trial who did not perform the autopsy? Is that your normal standard of practice? No? Ooh. Another deviation from policy and procedure in this case. But also it was the doctor who did perform the autopsy, Dr. Golden, he gave testimony at the preliminary hearing that suggested that maybe 2 people carried out this crime. Obviously, that's a big reason to make sure we do not ever have him come back here, since they stuck so rigorously to the theory that O.J. Simpson did this by himself. It was not 2 people. It was not O.J. with a helper. It was O.J. alone. So if we start talking that 2 people did this, next chapter, number 20, or chapter 20, too tight. Number 1, basically, Bailey knew how to push Darden's buttons. You have the balls of a stud-field mouse. Darden is a classic example of why it is so important for non-white victims to keep their emotions under control in the workplace. I feel like we say that. Heard that before, once or twice. One of the theories for O.J.'s inability to wear the gloves was that he stopped taking his arthritis medication, which is apparently false. We just heard that from Johnny Cochran in the trial. Number 2, William Bodziak, size 12 Bruno Magli shoes. The shoe evidence presented in court was not an accurate representation of the actual evidence. The actual footprints were very degraded, thus compromising identification. The shoe pattern may not be as rare given the common occurrence of fakes and knockoffs of expensive shoes. You can go back to the very first episode of The Cows when we came back on the air, February of 2009. 12 years we've been on the air. Chet Dettlinger, the late, he transitioned, I believe, in 2010. He co-authored the book, The List, about the Atlanta child murders, a case which also deals with fibers, carpet fibers. And in that case, when he was on the program, and in that case, they talked about, we got these rare carpet fibers. Oh, yes. And they convicted Wayne Williams. Chet Dettlinger said, I said back then, this is bogus. They get these people to come in here on the stand generally to convict black defendants and say, oh yeah, we got this rare carpet fiber, we got these really rare shoe prints, ooh, it's only 5 of these in the world, ooh, and this nigger happens to have a pair, ooh, or he's got this rare carpet, ooh, he had to do it. And then they come back with Chet Detlinger, same thing, he didn't get some obscure publication, he got like a CNN report where it was, oh man, FBI lab has greatly overstated the rarity of this carpet fiber evidence. And then 2015, ooh, the FBI has made all these errors and talking about, oh, we got an exact match and an exact identification, and oops, we lied or were wrong. And every time they said it wasn't that, it was sometimes they came out and gave incorrect information to exonerate people and get more O.J. Simpsons off the hook. It was consistently, we are in error in favor of the prosecution, so you get more OJs locked up, greater confinement. All this rare carpet fiber. Let's see. Number 3, Diedrich did present a stunning catalog of evidence tying Simpson to the murders, hair, and fiber. The scientific basis of hair and fiber evidence in criminal cases has come under the Biden administration has been urged to reopen the National Commission on Forensic Science, which was formed to improve the scientific integrity of criminal investigations. This commission was ended by the Trump administration and previous Attorney General Jeff Bogard, Sessions, Alabama, in the House. We didn't get that far yet. We'll have to stop right there. Much obliged. Our investor email is untiljustice@gmail.com. Other folks who dialed in, if you have thoughts, observations on the first portion of the reading, proceed.
Can I be heard?
Greetings, retired firefighter.
Greetings, Gus. Greetings to everyone. Have a question. Would it be accurate to state that the state of California's primary evidence on Orenthal James Simpson is the blood of the 2 victims were, according to them, located in places that they weren't at, but O.J. Simpson was, and also, just like you just mentioned, the fibers and that sort of thing, and all of this science was relatively new that they botched. Would I be correct in saying that?
I think most of the evidence, you're correct. The blood evidence, let's see, the fiber evidence, hair evidence, the gloves, obviously, and then he didn't really have much of an alibi. There's a lot of circumstantial things, but he didn't have much of an alibi that these are his gloves, the footprints, that they didn't have the shoes. But yeah, that would be most of it. And then, yes, they had lots and lots of errors in the autopsy, errors in evidence collection and cataloging, lies. Sometimes they weren't even errors, sometimes just lies in the search warrant, like lots of errors, problems, procedural misstep, violations of policy and procedure, like lots and lots and lots of those type of things all the way through, from the very beginning of the investigation all the way through.
Yeah, and on top of it, there really wasn't any open motive for O.J. Simpson killing those 2 people. Correct?
Well, they would say
that no one has ever came up with a motive, a significant motive in the trial, is what I'm asking.
The prosecution, they presented that this is a case about domestic violence, that O.J. Simpson was jealous, that he was upset, that he saw Nicole Brown Simpson, that she had permanently broke things off with him, and he was in a rage. His other girlfriend, Paula Barbieri, had broken up with him earlier that day, and he was in a rage. He saw Nicole Brown Simpson with Ronald Goldman, and he wigged out and killed them both. He had a history of domestic violence, so that's what they put forward as the motive.
Yeah. Well, one thing that does seem like it was a fact is that his defense was far more proficient than the state of California representatives. That is that is very clear, and it was to a lot of people back during that time that it was pretty clear once they started speaking on O.J. Simpson's behalf. As I can recall at the beginning, with the state of California coming out with all the evidence, it sounded like wow, O.J. is in some serious trouble, and from my memory, once his defense started coming out, then it produced at least that shadow of a doubt. And in some cases, even more than a shadow of a doubt, especially with Mark Fuhrman and the incompetency of this science. At all hands, they were able to dismantle all of their scientific facts, because right behind the so-called facts would be just obvious showing of derelict behavior with their going about which is supposed to be their jobs to do. And yeah, those are my thoughts in the first half as far as what I've heard. That kind of like reminds me of something that I really didn't pay a whole lot of attention towards back during that time, but it's kind of like bringing back some memories, so to speak. Thank you.
Much obliged, retired firefighter in Florida. Sure, many folks have had that experience where they, even if they didn't, pay attention to it every day and follow the trial, just remembering because it was so talked about and in the papers every day and just some of the details. But Mr. Simpson's, I think they did such a great job, they probably could have rested. They probably would have won this case without calling a single witness. That's how, in my view, I guess that speaks more to how pitiful the prosecution's case actually was. But, maybe that would have been risky.
Yeah.
Let's see. Other folks who dialed in, if you have thoughts, observations to share, line should be open. Proceed.
Can I be heard?
Thomas in New York. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Gus. Good evening to firefighter. What's been proven thus far is the killer has impeccable style. Bloomingdale's exclusive, Aris light, fine leather, stretchable gloves, Bruno Bagley shoes. Just based off of my observation, the overwhelming percentage of people who can afford these accessories are white. These are not cheap things. Even though OJ certainly can, I'm just saying, if you did it by percentage, it seems like it's all Darden's fault. That's the way they're trying to present this, not the lack of evidence, motive, and intent. Although Darden made a foolish mistake by making OJ try those gloves on in front of the jury. That was like the moment there. Everyone was glued to their TV. Could have went either way, and it went terribly wrong for him. A prosecutor should never make that mistake. What happened to Marsha Clark, though? She just disappeared weeks or months before leaving Darden pretty much in charge. He was just the add-on black guy. Everyone seems to know that but him. So he's in charge of presenting the case now. What happened to her? That should be the question. Why was he making that decision? Whether he took medicine or not, whether his hand swelled or not, his arthritis flared up or not, no lawyer would have made the request for him to try on gloves that were saturated in blood, that coagulated over time, and have rubber gloves on under it. Like, he took such a risk. That was, proved to be their failure. And the incompetence, the missing report, withheld evidence until the night before they presented it. And the defense, of course, asked for some extended time to look it over, and they find a whole report that was missing. Obviously hiding this report. That's why you wait until the last minute to present it and hope that they don't catch it in a short period of time. Just craftiness. Also, I don't think this should have gone past the grand jury. And you're correct. If the defense rests right now, right after the prosecution, how can they convict? $8 million you said on this case, that the clip that you played said that they spent on this case to cover up the involvement of police, planting physical evidence, biological evidence, to hide the nonchalant, outright improper collection of evidence, the inability to use the standard police protocols and procedures that all police forces around the world use to collect this evidence. Everything about it has been botched up. And I think they paid all this money to cover this all up, because this is terrible. And on top of all of that, how many of people before O.J. Simpson, or that couldn't afford millions of dollars worth of lawyers, had these same inconsistent botched investigations happen to them? Like, in my opinion, if it was total justice, every other case has to now be reinvestigated. We can't let anything, especially if these police officers were involved, the same ones in this case, everything has to be looked over. And I don't want to think.
Much obliged, Thomas, in New York, with the gloves and the shoes, especially at the civil trial. But even here, a lot of folks would say, you're right, you're absolutely right. These are really expensive play toy type items that most people can't afford. O.J. Simpson being one of the few who can. And not just that he could afford, but he had these gloves. See, got the receipt. He had these gloves, and, well, eventually they would say he had these gloves, or he had these shoes too, because it was the same size, size 12, and he wore size 12, even though they never produced them, that O.J. Simpson had these type of finer items to go do some killing. Let's see. And just to the point about this type of, whether you want to call it planting evidence, manufacturing evidence, if you want to call it not following policy and procedure, incompetence, take your pick, a little bit of all three and more, saying that, wow, I wonder how many times this happens to O.J. Simpson and he gets convicted for 30 years or the death penalty, or, you know, whatever it is. And then they find out, oh man, we did a, Dennis Fung didn't even put the samples in the refrigerator. And oh man, we got all kinds of errors and everything else. And I think Mark Fuhrman might have been snooping. I mean, you know, how often does this happen? A number of people said that apparently some of the outrage may be that, hey, white people are accustomed to and all right with locking up black people even under suspicious circumstances. That is all right with them. Curtis Flowers 6 times. I said they should put Curtis Flowers on the Mississippi state flag. The jurors did write a book, Madam Foreman, A Rush to Judgment, which is actually Johnny Cochran's line. Amanda Cooley, Carrie Bess, Marcia Rubin Jackson. And I'm just going to read a snippet. And this is about the DNA evidence and how often the mostly black jury. Again, I think we have honorary black jury members here because it seems like they talk about this jury as an all-black jury. Howard Stern did that in the opening segment. This was not an all-black jury. I don't know if we have honorary black people, but this was not an all-black jury. Anyway, they write, after we got out, we heard about others watching the DNA testimony on TV and how difficult it was to keep track of the details. Our sentiments exactly. Witness after witness, day after day. Of all witnesses, Robin Cotton was excellent. The lady knows her job. She's highly professional, but I think she put a little too much emphasis on her exhibits and on trying to relay information to us. What happened is she lost us, and I say us because I believe that everybody felt the same way. She talked down, and when you talk things down to people, you tend to lose them. They feel that, well, she thinks you don't understand anyway, so why would I spend a lot of time and effort listening to what she says? When we went on break and walked into the deliberation room, everybody heaved a sigh of relief. She talked down to us like we were illiterates, says Marcia. I didn't like that, but the woman knew what she was talking about. There's no doubt in my mind that Robin Cotton proved and tested what they sent her, but that did not mean it wasn't cross-contaminated before it got there, adds Carey. I agree with Marcia. I felt that she talked down to us because she felt that the mentality of the jury was not at her level. When I got out, I kept hearing more and more people saying there was only one graduate on the jury and so forth. So that indicates to me that they felt everybody else was illiterate. Maybe the first people who got out there and started talking and interviewing with the press gave that impression. But there were some very intelligent people on that jury panel. They should be commended for that. The boredom came in when people treated you as if you were a kindergartner or first grader. I realized that if you have a PhD and you're talking to someone who does not have training in the field of serology or forensic science, you might assume they're not going to understand some of the basics. Of course, you're not going to understand the total details of that field, but you don't have to. Unfortunately, there's no way to let the people know that you got it. You can't just raise your hand and say, Dr. Cotton, I understand what you're talking about. Move on. I'll stop there. They have lots of interesting. I would encourage folks, if you're, compiling your O.J. Simpson library, Madam Fuhrman might be a good one to add. It's pretty interesting perspective. Anybody who thinks that these are like some revolutionary black people who hate white people and they wanted to stick it to the man and stick it to the woman with this verdict, read this here book. You can, come to your own conclusion, see if there's any evidence. And this is only 3 of the folks on the jury, so I mean, that's not everybody. But read this book and see, is that what you got? We'll check out a few of the notes that I have from today's section. Already said, so Francine Florio Bunton, 38-year-old white woman, he said she described her as probably the most educated and worldly juror, of course, not like these other dumb, stupid black people. Let's see. Again, she said he writes that she was going to vote to convict him. Washington Post and other testimony contradicts that. It reminded me so much of right now, the COVID situation, where there have been people who struggled with weight gain and being stuck inside, them talking about the jury. and they're stuck, they're sequestered, they can't go anywhere, and they don't have family contact. So their family would just bring them all this food and cakes and cookies and pies. They said family members struggling to find some common ground with their increasingly estranged loved ones. Nearly a year of this began bringing gargantuan feasts to the hotel during visits, mostly cookies, cakes, at a fantastic pace, which only their remaining jurors gained weight at a fantastic pace, which only compounded their despair. Like $5 a day, you're stuck at this hotel, guarded by armed LA sheriffs, LA County sheriffs with guns, no phone, no TV, no computer. Rough for $5 a day. Rough. Like, I don't even think they allowed them to like use the pool and the gym at the hotel until the other guests vacated. Not fun. Let's see. They talked about Dr. Lakshmanan. He did not perform the autopsy, and again, lots of errors and what have you. I thought this is so ridiculous. The method of execution had drawn prosecutors' attention at an early stage in their investigation. Those with military experience recognized that the killing bore a great similarity to the way U.S. Navy SEALs are trained to dispatch their adversaries. In the weeks before the murders, Simpson had been filming an NBC pilot, Frogman, where several ex-SEALs had served as technical advisors. Had O.J. been trained to kill this way? Are you flipping serious? At nearly 50 years old, football injuries, CTE, I go on the set of a television show, and in a few hours, I mean, did he get months of training? Was it years? Did he get to go out and practice with a dummy? This is how you slit the do it again. We'll wake up tomorrow, do it again. They fight back. Is it two people at a time? Going out to be in Frogman, he acquired the skills to kill two people twice his age. Or less than half his age. Sorry, less than half his age. Yes, Frogman. Chapter 22 tight. Now, this is, how much in the weeds do you want to get? It's lots of these throughout the case. Like I said, they lied all throughout on the search warrant and everything else. And then when they get to too tight with these gloves, each glove bore a tag with the trade name Eris, the size extra large, and the style number. Now, when they go to get the receipt does not correspond to these gloves. Mr. Darden makes a point of that and saying, oh, it looks like there's some sort of error, right? Yeah, and they say, okay, it's the gloves. It's written, one of the codes is written wrong. On cross-examination, they say, hey, I don't even know what this item is that you're saying Nicole Brown Simpson purchased. There's an error on the receipt. Is it the gloves? Is it something else? Is it earmuffs? Who knows? It could very well she bought the gloves. It could be something else. I'm just pointing out as one of many. You can just put that on the mountain of evidence of misconduct, procedural errors, incompetence, questionable decisions, whatever else you want to call it. Mountain of that. Let's see. The rarity of the gloves, we talked about that. Let's see. One thing that the jurors pointed out, they talk about getting Van Natter because Phil Van Natter has large hands, and so he put on plastic latex gloves, and then he was able to get these gloves on, although they were pretty tight. One of the jurors pointed out, if these gloves are so tight, how would they be pulled off in the course of grappling? I mean, if they were pulled off in that manner, wouldn't they be inside out, not, just laying right side in and on the ground? How would they end up like that if these gloves are so tight? I thought that was a logical question. Next, let's see. All this about straightening his fingers, and he's keeping his thumb splayed out like a baby, the man knot. This is in video. You heard that in the ESPN documentary where Christopher Darden is saying, was it something suspicious about how he tried on the gloves? And Johnny Cochran objected, like, hey, we all watched it. We come to our conclusion. We don't need somebody to interpret this. We just watched this, right? Right. Objections abstain. Next. I mean, come on. You can just go to turn and watch it on YouTube. And I even said, let me try this. Let me see if I can you, particularly if you have a glove that's snug, can you not make it fit? Like, is it something like I just tried to mess around? And if it's kind of snug, it will generally kind of conform to your hand. Like, unless you can like bend your fingers, it's kind of tough to keep it from just kind of sliding down onto your hand, even if you would like it not to be there. But hey, that O.J. Simpson is kind of cagey. Let's see. I don't know where he doesn't source. He doesn't have footnotes right in the text, so it's hard to gauge where he's sourcing material from at times. Let's see. I thought it was important, he says, this speech where Marcia Clark, in talking about the evidence, should not be precluded when they waited late to give this report about the scientific evidence, and they wanted it precluded, meaning make this evidence not admissible. And he said that this speech by Clark, in particular, the way she played the victim card, represented a considerable gamble. White people are very skilled at playing the victim card. Well, Mark Fuhrman does this, like they're excellent at that sort of thing, playing on the emotions to get you to relate to and sympathize with white people, and manipulating behavior as such. Let's see. Again, he talks about the fibers. Already addressed that. Let's see. Oh, I thought this was so important. They do not include any evidence about the Bronco chase. This is important. This gets brought up frequently over the years. Jeffrey Toobin writes, even if Simpson's explanation sounded far-fetched, meaning he had, and they call it a disguise, for me this is just like the gloves and a knit cap. Gloves and a knit cap is not a disguise. A fake beard like what they showed, that is not a disguise. That is something appropriate because it's goofy, and he said he was to take his children to the amusement park. They're close to Disneyland. Appropriate, but I mean, it is not a disguise. And especially if you're O.J. Simpson and you can afford all these kinds of expensive leisure items, $200 fashion gloves and $200 or $5,000 shoes, you could get a disguise, not a $5 knit hat. And I mean, not a ski mask, a knit cap, like something to keep your forehead and ears warm, a knit cap. Anyway, even if Simpson's explanation sounded far-fetched, the prosecutors weren't positive that Simpson had really been trying to escape. Wait a minute. If the prosecutors aren't really sure that he was trying to escape, why is it when I hear this narrative presented, it is slam dunk? They were trying to get away. He was guilty. They even say that in the FX series. They don't have any such notion in the FX series that, not really sure. Was he trying to get? I played the 911 call. I said, wow, this sounds like somebody who might be about to kill himself. Like, whoa, I didn't think, it was that dire before. Super important. I'd probably say that's one of the more important lines of the book, because I think most people that you talk to, it's, oh yeah, he was trying to escape. They were trying to get to Mexico or wherever else he was trying to flee. Not, oh man, I don't know. I'm not really sure he was trying to escape. That the prosecutors weren't even sure of that, and that contributed to them not bringing this up at all. You have one of the lamest cases ever, Gil Garcetti. Extra, like I said, so lame, defense could have rested. No witnesses necessary. You got nothing. We rest too. Let's get out of here so we can have fun and party for the summertime. Other folks that we missed totally with commentary, proceed.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. Something that I'm not sure if you've heard of this book. It's called Birth of a Nationhood. It's a collection of essays edited by Toni Morrison about the O.J. Simpson trial. And I actually read that one earlier, in late 2019. And that was the first time that I had the realization that, oh, wow, O.J. Simpson probably didn't do it. I think it was written around 1996. So it might also be a good addition to the library. I also wanted to add that I really appreciate you adding the clips of Howard Stern. It's just really astonishing how blatantly racist they are in those clips, implying that all of the jury is from South Central, which means that they somehow are also criminals, so they would want OJ to be free. There's no logic there, especially when you place it in the context of, like, this is around the time that the crime bill is being written. And so this is at the height of, like, you know, the Black community kind of being a little bit more harsher on its, like, the people within that community in terms of people who are selling drugs or doing other illegal activities, and actually being a little bit more welcoming of policing. So I just didn't understand that at all, and it was just very interesting. And I thought it was interesting how he racially codes so much of, you know, what the jury does, even though you can see that they're very thoughtful people who took meticulous notes and cared so much to make sure that they got the right verdict. But then, you know, there's no character analysis of these white jurors who are, like, trying to get book deals and things like that. There's no flaw within them that's based on their whiteness, which I thought was interesting too. And that's all. I'll mute my line.
Hank, much obliged for your commentary. Before you mute, I think Red in Ohio, and perhaps one of our other listeners, I think, had just mentioned that book. I've not read it. Make sure I get that down. I've not read it. I think it's Birth of a Nationhood. See, everybody's playing off Birth of a Nation. Everybody. But it's edited by Toni Morrison, and then has lots of different essays by lots of folks. George Lipsitz, he wrote Collective Possessive Investment in Whiteness. It's got Kimberly Crenshaw, who's most, I think, known for her theory on intersectionality, or her contributions to how we talk about intersectionality. It's got a number of other, like, academics, people who are professors at major universities, and they write and publish mostly for colleges and universities, classes and such. What are some of the constructive things that you recall about that collection of essays? Because I know, like, it's got some that are talking about the theater aspect of the trial, and then other aspects talking about DNA and bashing the jurors. Like, what are some of the constructive points from the book you took away from it?
A lot, actually. So Toni Morrison's introduction is pretty informative in terms of understanding. Oh, she actually mentions Geronimo Pratt, too, and kind of does a side-by-side of Geronimo Pratt's trial versus O.J. Simpson, and talks about how ideas about white women's fragility and Black men seen as so-called, like, abusers is like a trope that was used that had no substantiality. There's another article in there. There's another essay in there that actually talks about the kind of the way that they had all these racially coded attacks against the jury, implying that the jury was really just dumb because they were Black women. I thought that essay was pretty good. And there's another essay, it's, I forgot the author's name, but she talks about a thing called Mapplethorpeism, and it's an idea about, like, Black men being over-sexualized in society, and that over-sexualization being a part of their dehumanization. Therefore, you know, like, kind of all like encompassing like the police state that we exist in that incarcerates Black men, and kind of tying it into like the psychosexual ideas that white people have about Black men. That's what I can think of off the top of my head, because I did read it a while ago. But and it's really interesting because in the beginning, like in the first couple of pages, Toni Morrison says, the timeline just does not add up. Like, it does not add up. And that's when I started looking into it, and I started realizing that too.
Interesting. Scott mentioned several. I told someone this week, I was like, I don't know, this looks like it could be a book written for college students, although I do think the books that are contemporary to when the trial happened, I do think those are important, because a lot of times they'll have a lot of just really important nuance and detail that sometimes will get lost over the years. Just like hearing people talk live time, like hearing Howard Stern talk live time about all of this. And sometimes he'll weave between this and the Colin Ferguson trial, which was happening at the same time in New York. Or sometimes they'll go from this to Susan Smith, the white woman who killed her children and blamed it on a Black male. Like, it's really interesting if you can get contemporary sources that are, oh my God, I gotta mention. So I was looking to the LA Times for the day the gloves came out to see what they said about all of this, which is fascinating, because they basically say the same thing that I did, like, ooh-wee, like the defense, I think, could rest. They even had a quote where Johnny Cochran, I think in Time magazine, they went to talk to him after the gloves, and he said, the defense rests. Like, nothing else need be said, like, all done. But talk about contemporary. So we're just a little over a month after the January 6th siege in Washington, D.C. President Trump impeachment trial is rolling. The LA Times, on the day after the glove demonstration, June 16, 1995. So the front page, it has O.J. Simpson with the gloves. Debacle. Oh my gosh. Worst day for the prosecutor. All the way down, they call it Beneath the Fold. This is the title. Militia leaders bring their fiery talk to Capitol Hill. Hearing. They claim mainstream roots but voice fringe hostilities to senators. One thing should be said about the militia movement. Public relations is not its strong suit. In their first joint appearance on Capitol Hill for a full-blown nationally televised congressional hearing, militia leaders from across the country claimed that their controversial movement is as benign as a neighborhood watch. Trayvon Martin. Yet they also warned darkly of angry Americans wreaking vengeance and retribution while predicting that time was running out before armed conflict erupted between the citizenry and the federal government. The hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Terrorism was scheduled after the April 19 bombing of the federal building in Oklahoma City, for which charges have been filed against two men who share beliefs of many militia organizations. Federal and local law enforcement officials who testified Thursday didn't attempt to link the militia organizations to the bombing, but they did warn that militia rhetoric is becoming increasingly explosive, and that the belief that the federal government is the enemy of the people is now spreading heavily. Is now spreading through heavily armed militias active in at least 39 states. I'll stop right there. Now again, this is from June 16, 1995, the day after the glove demonstration. I was not looking for this, and this wasn't even linked with any of the current, domestic terrorism that we're investigating allegedly. This was just investigating, prepping for the book club, and oh, look what's at the bottom of the newspaper. Same thing that's happening right now. And white people say, wow, we're ignorant. What do you mean domestic terrorism and white militia groups saying they got a problem with the federal government? What are you talking about? I never heard such a thing. Really? Should have paid more attention when you were scolding O.J. Simpson. All of that, well, not off target, but that was important. I thought, glad I got that in. But the book, Birth of a Nationhood, Gaze, Script, and Spectacle in the O.J. Simpson Case. It's edited by Toni Morrison and Claudia Brodsky-LaCour. I don't know if that's a white person or a non-white person. We'll have to see. Give some of the table of contents. I'm so glad Toni Morrison talked about the timeline, because I think that's hugely important too. George Lipsitz. Let's see. Nicole G. Alexander and Drusilla Cornell. Diminished or Banished, a testament to the reasonableness of the O.J. Simpson jury. That one sounds interesting. Let's see. Bigger and O.J. Simpson. Hurts, don't it? Becoming colorless and staying black in the crossover of O.J. Simpson. Oh, there's David Roddicker. Be in Toronto. We're just talking about him. Let's see. American Kabuki, Patricia J. Williams. I bet that's the sexual one. Let's see. What's she talking about? Let's see. Is she talking about anything? Oh, yeah. Let's see. So this is Patricia Williams, just picking American Kabuki at random, because I think she wrote another report that's really important about racism. I just forgot the title. I think it's about inheriting whiteness. It wasn't the riot so many soothsayers had almost lovingly predicted, but instead a soft rain of radioactive poison that began to fall right on schedule immediately after the bomb of the verdict. In one of the more symptomatic confrontations, Tammy Bruce, a white radio talk show host and head of the Los Angeles chapter of the National Organization for Women, declared on Nightline that the Simpson trial was not about racism, but rather about violence against women, and that focusing on domestic violence would provide a needed break from all that talk of racism. When Denny Bakewell, the head of a local black community group, protested that the statements she has made somehow giving domestic violence a priority over racism are unacceptable. You should not attack one at the expense of the other. Bruce shot back. I'm an advocate for women, but what I work on is to try to improve the quality of women's lives. I'm not going to take seriously a man who, I think I can safely say, does not have his finger on the pulse of my community. Incidentally, Black misandry, are all the victims of domestic violence females? Males are never victims of domestic violence? Just saying. With the lines of community thus drawn, black feminists started feeling a too familiar squeeze. Were we against domestic violence, or were we against racism? Were we in favor of black men, or on the side of white women? Were we going with the new rationalist race woman stance, standing by her rooting, tooting, raping, and looting man, who she hastens to explain wasn't really raping but only hurrying because he could hear the hooded horseman galloping around the house waiting to unsex him? Or would we follow in the grand tradition of those she-martyrs and great betrayers of the race, those intellectual bounty hunters who, following the lead of Anita Hill, sacrificed their true black selves for feminism, always beating the hooded horseman to the job, always willing to sell the black men down the river of Hollywood as long as we are played by Whitney Houston? I'll stop there. Now, I don't know. I haven't read this book, but when I saw this the first time, I was like, I will put this on the back burner, because I was like, I'm trying to get information about the trial, and this seems like something different. I'm sure this article is not like all the other articles, but this, if I had read this one the first time around when I went to look at this book, it would have confirmed it. Like, yep, put that one on the back burner. Like, whew, got lots of metaphors, and it doesn't seem like it's talking about the evidence. Like, we'll put this one on the back burner. But we do have at least the verdict. She said it's constructive. Our caller that just shared Is this what? Do you remember this essay? Our caller is with us. Are you still with us? Maybe she disappeared. If she's with us, maybe you can share if you remember it or not. This particular.
No, I don't remember this essay. The ones I remember the one that the one that was talking about the jury specifically, and I remember the one by George Lipsett.
The greatest story ever told: marketing and the O.J. Simpson trial. That's George Lipsett. And the jury one intrigued me as well. Like I said, it's lots of essays. I mean, it's all over, like, you know, in terms of what they're talking about, and, you know, different person is writing each component. I think Toni Morrison does the essay. Let's see. We'll try and see if we can find one more to redeem them. Maybe we'll get to see if we can find what the late Toni Morrison had to say. Let's see. Oh, let's see. Okay, let's see. This is Toni Morrison. We'll try again. In the Simpson case, the prosecution put forward a motive, jealous rage, to explain Mr. Simpson's alleged feral behavior. I love that word. But the accumulation of hard evidence they did not have to prove its credibility. They needed a coherent case, not a coherent defendant. Senseless is the term most often applied to crime and criminals anyway. In Melville's narrative, the clutch of the plot is the control the author exercises over the reader. An American captain boards a ship in disrepair with gifts of food and good intentions. What he sees is what he is socialized to see. Docile, if disorderly blacks. A frail, unmanly, red un-American captain attended by a devoted Singhalese. The American captain spends the day on board the San Dominique, happily observing, inquiring, chatting, and arranging relief for the distressed ship's population. This is what I mean when I said, I looked at this and I said, this is written for academics. I point this out consistently in the book club when they have references to like Moby Dick, and these are like revered Huckleberry Finn, like revered books that are part of the White Academy. It's depending on you having a certain set of white knowledge. So if you don't know Moby Dick, then a lot of these, like, what is she talking about? Are we talking about O.J. Simpson and blah, 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 and all that? Like, yeah, that was, I remember when I looked at this, I said, I think this is probably written for white people in the academy, just based on who is writing and what they're talking about. Like, I'm sure they probably do have some great information, but like, I was not, when I was starting off, I want to just, let's just get to the details. Like, that's why I privileged the trial transcript above like everything, because then you don't have to wade through all of the metaphors and Moby Dick. And yes, yes, she does talk a lot, it seems, about the white women. Does she have anything else to redeem? Mr. Simpson's guilt increasingly remote to some African Americans, not because they knew or loved him, not even because he is black, nor because they suspected foul play. Early on, it began to look like white mischief, the kind that surfaces when the opportunity to gaze voluptuously at a black body presents itself. The narrative of the entertainment media and their breaking story Confederates was so powerfully insistent on guilt, so uninterested in any other scenario, it began to look like a media pogrom, P-O-G-R-O-M, meaning campaign of murder, a lynching with its iconography intact, a chase, a cuffing, a mob, name-calling, white female victim. They did a lot of name-calling, and most of all, the heat, the panting, the flared nostrils of a pack already eager to convict. This is much better. For many, black and white, the passion they felt in the wake of the media onslaught was real, hinging as it did on violence and treachery. Mr. Simpson became the repository of fear. Every woman who had felt or witnessed the insensate brutality of men who had tenderly touched her body where bruises, swellings, and breaks limbed the violence she had suffered, saw in him the lover she had, or should have, fled. Men who had let their guard down and actually loved this charming black man, Men who relished the comfort they felt in his company or remembered the beauty of his runs forever, it seemed, across fields long and wide, must have felt that they had loved the wrong kind of man. The media's instant and obvious preference for a guilty man created an early, if not immediate, public rage at having been deceived, of having profoundly flawed judgment. Mr. Simpson was accused of multiple murder, but he was guilty of personal treason. A woman opens her door, steps out, and has her head chopped off. A man performs a neighborly gesture, and it is cut to pieces. The media response to this obscenity was excessive, manipulative, and generally obfuscatory. Obfuscatory. My goodness, I've not said that word like ever in life, although we say all the time obfuscate. Obfuscatory. Last attempt, that was close enough. But the blood it smelled belonged not to the victims, but to the prey, a potent sensation aroused by the sight of a fallen, treacherous, violent black body, and sustained by the historical association of such a body with violence as dread entertainment. I'll stop there. That's a little bit better, but it does seem like it's kind of written for an academic audience. But anywho, this is all in the introduction for Birth of a Nationhood, Gaze, Script, and Spectacle in the O.J. Simpson case, edited by the late Toni Morrison. I've not read it, but folks, many Cal's listeners have had their eye on this book, and either some folks read it, thumb up, constructive, other folks are looking to read it next. We actually have 10 minutes that we'll do from the next chapter. We don't have to read it, but I'm just getting this in because next week we might be in the Fuhrman tapes, so that means there'll be two really important moments to examine next week. They have a big argument about sounding black and sounding white next week. So to make sure that we can have time for that and the Fuhrman tapes, we'll do our 10 minutes of audio here before we wrap things up this evening. So this is the first few minutes of the next chapter, Sounding Black. Context of White Supremacy, Jeffrey Toobin, the run of his life, very short audio segment 2.
Chapter 21. Sounded Black. The prosecutors had no monopoly on arrogance in Judge Ito's courtroom. Forced for months to respond to whatever the prosecution threw at them, the defense lawyers hungered for the opportunity to make their own case to the jury. As always, their egos played a big part in their considerations. Each member of the defense team had researched a part of the planned defense case, and each one longed to present his evidence to the jury. Cochran had Simpson's family. Bailey, with Pat McKenna, had found the witnesses who could testify about the time of the murders and about Simpson's demeanor on June 12th. Shapiro had Simpson's doctor, Robert Huizenga, and pathologist Michael Bodden. Scheck had forensic expert Henry Lee. All wanted their moments on stage. Simpson egged his lawyers on. Not surprisingly, he saw the trial in football metaphors. For months, in conversations with friends, Simpson had asked them to wait for the defense case. That's when his team would have the ball. That's when they would score their points. In fact, the football analogy was not apt. It is often best for defendants in criminal cases to do nothing. With no burden of proof, defendants and their lawyers often serve themselves best by poking holes in the prosecution's case and putting on no evidence at all. Taking the initiative to prove something carries risk. In a murder case, for example, a defendant who presents evidence at least implicitly suggests to the jurors that he will unveil the real killer to them. But in responding to the entreaties of their client and to the needs of their own vanity, the defense lawyers forgot something very important, that their client was guilty. And so, to the extent that it concerned the events of June 12, 1994, as opposed to the police investigation of those events, the evidence the defense presented made Simpson look more guilty, not less. And yet, incredibly, the prosecution's arrogance and clumsiness during the course of the defense case managed even here to trump the folly of O.J. Simpson's lawyers. Cochran wisely played it safe to start. He called to the stand 3 Simpson women, O.J.'s daughter, Arnell, his sister, Carmelita Durio, and most dramatically, his mother, Eunice. All poised, all dressed in yellow, and all conspicuously loyal to O.J., the 3 women served more as exhibits than witnesses, with nothing of substance to say about the evidence. Oddly and irrelevantly, they all suggested that Ron Shipp was drunk on the night he said he had spoken with O.J. about his dreams of killing Nicole. Cochran tried throughout the trial to separate O.J., here portrayed as a loving father, brother, and son, from the wild world of white women like Nicole and Faye Resnick. The verbal and nonverbal testimony of these 3 appealing African-American women marked another way of reaching out to the 8 middle-class black women on the jury. Cochran followed Simpson's relatives with a number of people who saw O.J. in the days before the murders, a fellow guest at a fundraising dinner on June 11th, an interior decorator who met with him on June 6th, and a man who played golf with Simpson on June 8th at a Hertz event in Virginia. All of them testified that Simpson had behaved appropriately, in a friendly and cordial manner. One can scarcely imagine less provocative or relevant testimony. So Simpson was nice to these people. So what? But with them, again, Clark's frustration surfaced. She went after these witnesses as if they were gangsters. Clark snarled at the golfer, Jack McKay, the mousy chief financial officer of the American Psychological Association. After the 2 hours you spent with him, you don't know what he looked like, do you? McKay said he didn't. You did not see him on June the 9th, 1994, correct? Correct. The 10th? No. The 11th? No. The 12th? No. The plainly terrified McKay conceded. Clark's hostility had, perversely, elevated the importance of a witness she should have dispatched with just a question or 2. And with the hapless McKay, Clark was just sharpening her knives for the rest of the defense witnesses. Moving through witnesses quickly, 12 in 2 days, Cochran turned next to Ellen Aronson and Danny Mandel. On the night of the murders, this young couple had gone out on their first and only date, dinner at Mezzaluna. Aronson lived near Nicole's condominium, and after their meal, she and Mandel strolled right by the murder scene. The key issue in their testimony was the time they passed Nicole's front door. It would be difficult to imagine 2 more upstanding witnesses. Aronson produced videos for children, and Mandel had a job in finance at Sony Pictures. They were educated and articulate. Neither had an axe to grind or a lust for publicity. They had behaved responsibly since the night of the murders, calling the police immediately to report what they remembered. The computer receipt of their restaurant bill showed that it had been printed at 9:55 p.m. They had chatted for a while after Mandel paid the bill, and estimated that they left the restaurant at about 10:15. This would mean that, in Aronson's words, they passed by Nicole's residence at a little after 10:25. In their testimony, both Mandel and Aronson remembered nothing out of the ordinary on Bundy Drive, no barking dogs, and certainly no dead bodies. For Marcia Clark, this was a problem. In her opening statement and through the testimony of Pablo Fenbez, Clark had committed herself to the murders having taken place at 10:15, the time that Fenbez asserted he heard the plaintive wail of the dog. But if the couple on the date saw or heard nothing at 10:25, what of Clark's theory? That was why the defense wanted Mandel and Aronson on the stand. In fact, Clark had several options for dealing with their testimony. Fenbez lived behind Nicole's house, while the couple had walked in front of it. Perhaps, Clark could have suggested, they simply didn't hear the same sounds. Likewise, perhaps they were simply a little off in their time estimates. Or, most likely of all, Fenves may have been slightly mistaken, and the murders did not take place, and Cato the Akita did not start barking until around 10:30. That still would have given Simpson plenty of time to make the 5-minute drive to his own house and appear in front of Allen Park, the limousine driver, at 10:55. All in all, then, Aronson and Mandel's testimony was in no sense exculpatory for Simpson. Clark should have had no trouble integrating their version of events into the general prosecution outline of how the murders took place. But Clark took a different approach to the couple's testimony. The prosecutor's explanation for Aronson and Mandel's account? They were liars, and drunken liars to boot. "I just have to ask you one question," Clark began her frosty cross-examination of Aronson. "That credit card receipt in the amount of $47.50, you guys didn't have anything to drink?" "No," said Aronson. "You just had dinner?" "No alcohol," the witness replied firmly, just as Mandel had said. Did that seem like a large amount to pay for just 2 dinners and a cappuccino? Cochran objected to this digression, but Clark kept pursuing Aronson, forcing her to account precisely for what they ate and how it could possibly have added up to $47. In fact, if Clark had called Mezzaluna, or any of the other overpriced boîtes that dot Brentwood, she would have learned that it was easy to spend $50 on practically no food at all. But Clark didn't. Instead, she just accused Aronson of conducting a boozy debauch in preparation for her walk home. Practically spitting her words at Aronson, Clark demanded to know how many people were in the restaurant, exactly the route she had walked, everyone she had talked to about the incident, when she had first called the police, even what Aronson had been wearing. "And you are not sitting here trying to tell us there was no body lying at the foot of the steps at 875 South Bundy?" Clark growled. Ito asked her to rephrase the question. "Miss Aronson," Clark said with no less hostility, "are you telling the jury that there was no one lying at the foot of the steps at 875 South Bundy when you passed by?" "I have no idea," said Aronson, who at this point was looking at Clark as if the prosecutor were insane. 3 more women from the neighborhood testified that the scene near Bundy was silent at 10:15, and one of them said that the dog didn't start barking until about 10:35. Again, it was all consistent with Simpson's guilt, but not with the prosecution's theory of the case.
All righty. Context of White Supremacy. So we'll pick up there. So immediately next week, we're going to a moment where we'll have to slow down because this is a big argument. Sounding black, sounding white. That's the name of the chapter, Sounding Black. So slow down for that. And then we're going into the Fuhrman tapes. I also have to point out, now, we are in chapter 21. This book only has 23 chapters and an epilogue. Just for scale comparison, if you look at the Court TV OJ 25 series, 25 episodes, the point where we are, where OJ Simpson's daughter, mother, all of them take the stand, that is episode 15. There are an additional 10 episodes to explain everything else that happened over the next 3 months of the trial. This book has 2 chapters. That's why I mentioned before, like, something is a little off scale about the presentation of evidence and testimony. It seems like we are skipping through, like, lots of things. Like, the doctor's testimony is very important. That's coming up next week. And some of the other neighbors, very important. But it seems like we are getting some greatly abbreviated editions of testimony. But we'll see. We'll see. Context of White Supremacy. Jeffrey Toobin, the run of his life. I will just say really quickly, then we'll see if any folks have thoughts, comments they'd like to share before we wrap up. The notes that I took from this chapter, where he says that the defense lawyers forgot something very important. Their client was guilty, And so to the extent that it concerned the events of June 12, as opposed to the police investigation of those events, the evidence the defense presented made Simpson look more guilty, not less. That is not my opinion. Looking at the witnesses that they provided, we'll hear some of the witnesses from next week. Laura Hart McKinney testifies. Denise Pilnack, I think that's because he doesn't list some of the individual witnesses who testify from the neighborhood who said, we didn't hear anything at 10:15. We didn't start hearing any noise until around 10:30, 10:35. In my view, that does not make O.J. Simpson look guilty. In my view, the same what Toni Morrison apparently concluded, this timeline is not working correctly. Like, I am not of the opinion that one could easily have more than enough time, as he says, to do these murders at 10:30 and then be back at your residence, not covered in blood. You have disposed of, all incriminating evidence and what have you, and you show up ready to roll by 10:55. Like, really? That's straining credibility. And you'd have to give me evidence that, yes, that's what he did. This is how he did it. And you don't have that evidence. Let's see. He says, he's talking about Eunice Simpson and Arnell Simpson, his family mother, daughter, sister, all poised, all dressed in yellow, and all conspicuously loyal. I don't even know what that means. Conspicuously loyal to OJ. Are they not supposed to be loyal? It's his mother and daughter and sister. The three women served more as exhibits than witnesses. Really? I thought at minimum Arnell Simpson was there the night that the enforcement officials arrived. So I would think at minimum she might have some important testimony about their conduct and were they functioning like OJ was a suspect. So I think her testimony might be important. But exhibits, the man not, the woman not. You're not a person. You're not a human being. You are a thing. We had some of our listeners who talked about the way Toobin describes black females, especially throughout the book. He talked about the rotund 911 caller, dispatcher who came in to testify. Let's see. I don't know. He talks about Marsha Clark. He said her arrogance. If she's snarling at witnesses who are really of no consequence, is that ignorance? Is that incompetence? Is that affirmative action? That doesn't seem like arrogance. Why are you, what sort of strategy? Is that the plan? Like, I'm going to get an attitude because she did that a lot. She did that even with some of these witnesses that he doesn't name, Denise Pilnack and some of these other folks who incidentally thought O.J. Simpson was guilty. Testified for the defense. We didn't hear anything at 10:15. Noise didn't start until around 10:30, 10:35. Marsha Clark did the same thing. Went after these folks, called them all kinds of names in her book and what have you. What kind of strategy is that? Is that arrogance? Again, is that ignorance? Is that incompetence? What I said before, is that being uncouth? Crass? Affirmative action? Any other folks have additional thoughts, comments they wanted to get in before we wrap things up?
Yes, can I be heard again?
Retired firefighter in Florida.
Yes, I want to go to those gloves, and was it reported that he had a cut or cuts on his hand?
Yes, on his left hand. He had the one main cut and then a number of other smaller kind of surface cuts on his left hand. So yes, it was that the left glove came off at Bundy, Nicole's house, and then the right glove at his own residence.
Okay, so I'm like assuming. Okay, then if there is cuts on his hand, and he has, and reportedly, if he's the murderer, he had on these leather gloves. It should be damage to the glove in order for him to have cuts on his hand. Am I correct so far? That makes sense?
Well, I think the theory is that the glove was pulled off in the scuffle with Ron Goldman, and that at some point after the scuffle or after the glove was removed, then he cut his hand because the glove doesn't have any cuts in it. So that was the theory, that the glove was pulled off and then somehow his hand was cut in the scuffle with Goldman after that glove was pulled off.
Okay, so he murdered one of the people with one glove.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, okay. And one glove was on the scene. The other glove was in and around his residence. Correct?
Right.
All right. Okay. I just wanted it makes sense to me now on how all of that comes together as far as with the cuts are concerned and whatnot. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Again, they do have photographs. The Chicago police was dispatched to Mr. Simpson's room, the hotel where he stayed briefly in Chicago, where he was notified of his ex-wife's murder, where he said he smashed a glass and cut his finger. They have photographs that was presented at the trial. The Chicago police officers testified. They saw the broken glass. Apparently they got there immediately before the room was even cleaned, so no interference. They saw the broken glass. They saw a little bit of blood around the sink area, and I think they said maybe a drop of blood on the sheet. And so it looked reasonable, like, hey, looks like he might have smashed a glass in the hotel room after hearing that his, Nicole Brown Simpson had been killed, and cut his finger in the process. And we'll hear about that, or I suspect we might hear more about the cut next week. But yeah. Any other folks? Question, observation they want to get in before we wrap up?
Yeah, Gus, you mentioned the frog suit earlier. And as for the frog suit, it's just such a nonsensical. This is why they never brought it in the court. But after the case, there's been programs about him killing people in this frog suit. And you have to assume that somehow, I guess, the characters in movies, they put on the costume and they really get the superpowers now, because it doesn't make sense. And also, Cato Callan's testimony about him and OJ, I think they went to McDonald's and they hung out for a few. That totally eliminates the frog suit. It's like one of those things that after the case, this was it. This was what they missed, and they do that a lot. The last thing I wanted to say, you mentioned the militia movement. And right after this case, you had the bombing at Atlanta's Olympics. I don't know if you remember that. It was a 1996 Olympic bombing, and the militia groups harbored the bomber for months, keeping him away from federal officers, getting into firefights with federal officers, protecting this guy. And I'm here my thinking.
Oh, wow. Yep, that was, I guess the civil trial was going on during the Olympic bombing, a little bit down the road. Like, that's amazing. And I forgot, the Unabomber was on the loose in the midst of all of this. He threatened LAX in the middle of I think it's lined up about where we are in the trial, but that caused a big to-do. They published his letter in the midst of the trial, and, they disrupted the whole airport because they didn't know if he was going to bomb something at the airport. But I mean, woo, white domestic terrorists were running amok while we were all looking at O.J. Simpson. Let's see. Other folks who dialed in with a hand up. Caller at 2824. Did you have commentary? Just listening.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
This is D from Santa Rosa. I just want to say you guys are doing an amazing job with this. Getting a lot of information, especially with the side information you've been given. The commentary from everybody who's participating has been amazing. I'm learning a lot. And just one thing I want to say. I noticed that in movies that all professional killers were, you know, the finest things. Like, I've never seen a movie where an assassin was wearing sneakers. So that goes to, like, the footprints and stuff. So, and how elaborate they cost. And I mean, my line, that's it.
Much obliged, sir. I think that folks brought that up before. Again, you know, some people would say, hey, O.J. Simpson, he could afford, you know, the lavish life, the juice. You know, he'd been making millions, and movie star, and football career, and roots and all the rest. So, you know, he could have that fancy 007 wardrobe and go out and do some killing in Brentwood. You know, that's the way they pitch it, at least. Did we miss anybody? Any other comments folks need to get in?
On your call. That is one of the biggest.
Hi, Gus and Kyle's callers. I was just listening to when one of the jurors said that she assumed that the glove would fit OJ. So I found that it's interesting that she said that she assumed, because one of the things in a court case, you must never assume anything. It's all what could be proven in the so-called case of law. And then it seems like they also use Christopher Darden as the fall guy. So they're always making it seem like he's like incompetent. And then when they kind of set him up, because he's a bit of a hothead. So when I think Lee Bailey was trying to get him to get him kind of upset. And the thing about with Bailey is that he did kind of practice racism in a way when he was trying to get Christopher Darden upset, because sometimes what the suspected white supremacists do, they know that non-white people they respond to things with their emotions. So it's like, I mean, it was still like a lawyer tactic, but that's that aspect of the color line and race relations is still there. When sometimes white people antagonize a non-white person to get them angry, and then because they get angry, they can't think straight. So that was just one point that I was thinking about. And then at the time during the 90s, you had Timothy McVeigh, you had Waco, Texas. So the early 90s to the mid 90s, there was a lot of white terrorism going on. And yes, Gus, I agree with you that there was a lot of white terrorism going on, and it kind of deflected people away. By the OJ trial kind of did that. Thank you.
Much obliged, caller in Canada. I would have never even caught that if I hadn't just gazed down while looking at the newspaper. Let's see. I believe we nabbed all the folks who had questions, comments, observations. I think we have 2 sessions left before we will be all done. There are only 2 more chapters left, and we should make a lot of the Fuhrman files. That will be next week, so we'll be looking forward to that, and even seeing how he covers it. Does he go ahead and give it all in detail, unedited, or Yeah, that'll be next week. Actually, it'll be 2, sounding black, because that was a huge argument in court. What does that mean? Is it even racist to suggest that someone can sound black? Cannot wait. Next week. We'll be here tomorrow for Neutralizing Workplace Racism, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And the compensatory call-in this Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Lots to add you to your O.J. Simpson library. Madam Fuhrman, great selection. And then Birth of a Nationhood, edited by Toni Morrison. But that's like, collection of essays you have to flip through and kind of check it out at your leisure. See if you think there's anything constructive. Let's see, 2824. Do you have anything? Are you satisfied, sir? Oh, okay. Just making sure.
Oh, I'm good.
Awesome. Awesome. Much obliged to everyone for tuning in. We'll be here in 24 hours. Sobriety would be best under conditions of white supremacy. We will need our brain computer to solve the problem. In addition to being sober, let's be buckled. Now, I still suggest white terrorism. It was a big problem, 1995. That is still the case, 2021. So, you're going out and about, someone is being loud and rowdy, exit. This is not the time for verbal confrontations and trying to prove a point. If you did not have a plan when you left your residence or when you started this adventure that involved some sort of violent or counter-violent confrontation, exit. You have no idea if this person is armed, if they have like a whole army of white militia members who are hiding out armed and have just been waiting for some non-white person to come by being sassy. Get out of there. Very violent times right now, especially in the U.S., where you have lots of armed race soldiers, badge or no. If you are going out, you are sober, passenger or driver, you are buckled. If you're driving, you are not on the cell phone. Again, just small things that we can do to minimize contact with the Mark Fuhrmans of the known universe. Sober, buckled, not on the cell phone, just little things that we can do. And again, we do need our attention, so we can't really be texting if we're going to be vigilant, mindful of what's happening around us. All of that said, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. Man, I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.